Chaos, the god of the void, the beginning of all existence. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine nothing. Not darkness, because darkness is something. Not silence, because silence implies the absence of sound, which means sound exists somewhere to be absent. Not emptiness, because to be empty suggests a container that could be filled. True nothing. Absolute void. A state so fundamental, so primordial, that your human mind recoils from it because we are creatures of form, of substance, of light and matter, and we cannot truly conceive of what existed before any of these things came to be. Now, open your eyes. Look around you. Everything you see, the walls, the air you breathe, the stars beyond your ceiling, the very atoms that compose your body, all of it, according to the ancient Greeks, emerged from that unthinkable state. They had a name for it. They called it chaos. But here is where the story becomes strange, where the mythology reaches into something deeper than mere storytelling. The Greeks did not think of chaos the way we might today. When we hear chaos, we imagine disorder, confusion, things tumbling over one another without pattern or purpose. But that is not what the ancient word meant. The Greek word chaos derives from a verb meaning to gape, to yawn, to open wide. Chaos was not disorder. It was a gap, a chasm, an infinite opening in reality itself, vast and silent, holding within its impossible depths the seeds of everything that would ever exist. This is the story of that primordial void. This is the tale of chaos, the god who was not quite a god, the place that was not quite a place, the beginning that somehow preceded even the concept of beginnings. And from this story, you will come to understand something profound about how the ancient Greeks viewed their universe, their gods, and their own existence. Tonight, we journey back before time itself had meaning. We travel to an era before the earth existed, before the sky stretched overhead, before the first star flickered into being. We go all the way back to the very first moment of existence, if moment can even apply to a state where time had not yet been born. We go back to chaos. But this will not simply be a recounting of ancient mythology. Along the way, we will discover something remarkable. The ancient Greeks, writing nearly 3,000 years ago, intuited something about the nature of reality that modern physics is only now beginning to understand. The void they called chaos, that gaping emptiness from which all things emerged, bears a striking resemblance to concepts found in quantum mechanics and Big Bang cosmology. The ancients looked at the universe and asked the same questions we ask today. What came before the beginning? How can something come from nothing? Why is there existence instead of void? They answered with mythology. We answer with mathematics. But perhaps both approaches are reaching toward the same ineffable truth. So settle in. Let the world around you grow quiet, because we are about to explore the oldest story ever told, the story of how everything began. And at the heart of that story stands a figure shrouded in primordial mystery, a deity so ancient that even the mighty Zeus treated her descendants with caution, a force so fundamental that without it, nothing you know or love or fear would exist. This is chaos. This is the beginning. This is where all stories start. The question of origins has haunted humanity since we first developed the capacity to wonder. Every civilization, every culture, every tribe that has ever gathered around a fire has looked up at the stars and asked, how did all of this come to be? The Egyptians had their Nun, the primordial waters of creation. The Babylonians spoke of Tiamat and Apsu, the mingling of salt and fresh waters from which the gods emerged. The Norse had Ginnungagap, the yawning void between fire and ice. The Hebrew scriptures begin with the declaration that the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. But among all these creation accounts, the Greek conception of chaos holds a special place. It was the Greeks, after all, who would go on to develop philosophy, to birth the Western tradition of rational inquiry, to ask not just what the gods did, but why the universe operated according to discernible principles. And when Hesiod, one of the earliest Greek poets whose work survives, sat down around the 8th century BCE to compose his Theogony, a grand genealogy of the gods, he began not with Zeus, not with the Titans, not even with the earth herself. He began with chaos. Verily, at the first chaos came to be, Hesiod wrote. 5 simple words in translation, yet they contain an entire cosmology. At the first, before anything else, before the mountains and the seas, before the sun and moon, before life and death themselves had any meaning, there was chaos. And from chaos, all the rest would follow. But what exactly was chaos? This question has puzzled scholars, philosophers, and theologians for millennia. Hesiod does not describe chaos in detail. He does not give it a face, a personality, a collection of myths and adventures. Chaos simply is. It exists. Or rather, it comes to be, which is a subtle but important distinction. Even chaos, even the primordial void, had a moment of origination. Before chaos, there was apparently something even more fundamental, something so ineffable that Hesiod cannot or will not name it. This is one of the great mysteries at the heart of Greek cosmogony. The creation account in Hesiod's Theogony is not truly a creation from nothing. Chaos does not create the universe the way the God of Genesis creates with a word. Instead, chaos provides the space, the possibility, the fundamental ground in which creation can occur. It is less an active force and more a necessary precondition. Without the gap, there can be no things to fill it. Without the void, there can be no matter to occupy it. And almost immediately after chaos comes to be, other primordial forces emerge. Hesiod tells us that next wide-bosomed Gaia appeared, Earth herself, described as the ever-sure foundations of all the deathless ones who hold the peaks of snowy Olympus. Then comes dim Tartarus, the pit beneath the earth, the eventual prison of the Titans. And then Eros, love itself, fairest among the deathless gods, who unnerves the limbs and overcomes the mind and wise counsels of all gods and all men within them. Now, here is where the mythology becomes genuinely philosophically interesting. Hesiod does not say that chaos gave birth to Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros. The language is ambiguous. These beings seem to emerge after chaos, but not necessarily from chaos. They may be chaos's children, or they may be independent emanations from that same unknowable source that gave rise to chaos itself. Scholars have debated this point for centuries, and there is no definitive answer. What is clear is that chaos holds a unique position in the Greek pantheon, the first named entity, the original state of existence, the foundation upon which all else is built. But chaos does have definite offspring, and these children would become some of the most powerful, most feared, most fundamental forces in the entire Greek universe. Before we can understand chaos as a deity, we must understand what the word itself meant to the ancient Greeks. This is crucial because our modern understanding of chaos is fundamentally different from the ancient one, and confusing the two leads to profound misunderstanding of Greek cosmology. When English speakers today hear chaos, they think of disorder, confusion, pandemonium. We might describe a messy room as chaotic, or a turbulent political situation, or the aftermath of a natural disaster. Chaos, in our modern usage, implies things in disarray, elements clashing without pattern or purpose. But the ancient Greek word chaos meant something entirely different. The word derives from the Greek verbs kasko and kano, both of which mean to gape, to yawn, or to be wide open. The same Proto-Indo-European root gives us our English word yawn and the concept of a chasm. When Hesiod and his contemporaries spoke of chaos, they were not thinking of disorder. They were thinking of an opening, a vast, formless gap in reality itself. Imagine standing at the edge of an immense canyon, so deep and wide that you cannot see the bottom or the other side. Now imagine that canyon extended infinitely in all directions, not just horizontal but vertical, not just in space, but in some dimension that precedes space. That is something closer to what the Greeks meant by chaos. It was not mess, it was emptiness. Not confusion, but void. Not disorder, but the fundamental absence of order, which is subtly but importantly different. This distinction matters because it changes how we understand the entire Greek creation myth. In a chaos as disorder model, creation would involve sorting out the mess, organizing pre-existing elements into coherent forms. But in the chaos as void model, creation involves something more fundamental: the emergence of form itself from a state where form had no meaning. The Greeks were wrestling with a question that still troubles physicists today. How can something come from nothing? Modern cosmology tells us that our universe began from a singularity, a point of infinite density and zero volume, and expanded outward in what we call the Big Bang. Before that moment, if before even has meaning in this context, there was no space, no time, no matter, no energy as we understand them. There was something, but we struggle to describe what. The Greek concept of chaos represents an ancient attempt to name that something. Chaos was not nothing, because nothing cannot exist, a paradox that has occupied philosophers from Parmenides to Heidegger. But chaos was not quite something either, at least not something in any sense we can comprehend. It was potential, possibility, the ground from which existence could spring. Later Greek philosophers would develop this concept further. Aristotle, writing several centuries after Hesiod, grappled with the nature of chaos in his Physics. He understood chaos as something that exists independently of bodies, but without which no perceptible bodies can exist, a kind of cosmic container or medium. The philosopher Anaximander proposed a concept he called apeiron, the unlimited or boundless, which seems related to chaos, but carries additional philosophical freight. For Anaximander, the apeiron was not just the source of all things, but also their final destination. Everything emerges from boundlessness and eventually returns to it. Plato, in his Timaeus, developed the concept of chora, shapeless space containing traces of the elements in disordered motion. This chora served as the receptacle for the creative work of the demiurge, the divine craftsman who gave form to matter. While not identical to Hesiod's chaos, the chora represents a similar philosophical impulse. The recognition that creation requires not just a creator and materials, but a medium, a space, a fundamental emptiness that makes form possible. The Roman poet Ovid, writing around the turn of the first millennium CE, several centuries after Hesiod, would reinterpret chaos in a way that brings it closer to our modern understanding. In the opening of his Metamorphoses, Ovid describes chaos as a rude and undeveloped mass, a lifeless lump, unfashioned and unframed, of jarring seeds and justly chaos named. Here, chaos becomes not an empty void, but a confused mass containing all elements jumbled together. This is the origin of our modern meaning of the word: disorder rather than emptiness, confusion rather than void. This Ovidian interpretation would dominate medieval and Renaissance understanding of chaos, which is why the word means what it does in English today. But we should remember that Hesiod's original conception was quite different. For the earliest Greek thinkers, chaos was not a jumble of things, but the absence of things, or more precisely, the fundamental gap that made things possible in the first place. Understanding this distinction illuminates the entire structure of Greek cosmogony. When chaos comes to be, existence itself becomes possible. When Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros emerge, The basic framework of reality takes shape, matter and depth, and the force that binds things together. When Erebus and Nyx are born from chaos, the primordial darkness and night fill the void, giving it texture and quality. And when Ether and Hemera emerge from Nyx and Erebus, light and day finally enter the cosmos. The progression is elegant, from emptiness to darkness to light, from void to matter to life, from the unthinkable to the conceivable to the fully formed world we inhabit. And at every stage, chaos remains present, not as an active participant in creation, but as the fundamental ground that makes creation possible. Even after the Titans and Olympians take their places, even after Zeus defeats Cronus and establishes his rule, chaos persists. In one dramatic passage of the Theogony, during the war between the Olympians and the Titans, Hesiod describes Zeus hurling his thunderbolts with such force that fearful heat seized chaos, suggesting that even this primordial void can be affected by the cosmic upheavals of the gods. There is something profound here, something that transcends mere mythology. The Greeks intuited that reality has layers, that beneath the visible world of mountains and seas and creatures lies a more fundamental reality, and beneath that another, and beneath that perhaps the primal void itself. They expressed this intuition through the figure of chaos, not quite a god, not quite a place, but something older and stranger than either. Modern physics has arrived at similar conclusions through different means. Quantum mechanics reveals that what we call empty space is actually seething with activity, virtual particles popping into existence and annihilating each other on timescales too brief to measure directly. The vacuum is not truly empty, but full of potential, full of possibilities constantly becoming actual and then dissolving back into possibility. This quantum foam, as physicists sometimes call it, bears a remarkable resemblance to the ancient Greek conception of chaos, a void that is paradoxically full, an emptiness pregnant with everything that might ever exist. We will explore these connections between ancient mythology and modern science more fully later. For now, let us return to the mythological narrative and meet the children who emerged from that primordial void. To understand chaos, we must understand the text that introduces this primordial deity to us. The Theogony of Hesiod is our oldest and most important source for Greek cosmogony, and it remains one of the most influential religious texts in Western history. Yet it is also a document shrouded in mystery, a work whose author we know almost nothing about, composed at a time when writing was just beginning to transform Greek culture. Hesiod lived around the 8th century BCE, making him roughly contemporary with Homer, the legendary author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Unlike Homer, who, if he existed as a single individual, seems to have been a professional bard composing tales of heroes and wars, Hesiod presents himself as something different, a farmer from Boeotia, a region of central Greece known for its agriculture rather than its cultural sophistication. In his other major surviving work, The Works and Days, Hesiod complains about the laziness of his brother Perses and offers practical advice about farming, sailing, and daily life. But in the Theogony, Hesiod takes on a grander task. The title itself reveals his ambition. Theogony means the birth of the gods, from the Greek words theos, God, and gonos, birth, offspring. This is not merely a collection of stories, but a systematic attempt to map out the entire divine genealogy, to trace every god and goddess back to their ultimate origins, to understand the cosmos through the family relationships of its divine inhabitants. Hesiod claims divine inspiration for this task. In the poem's opening, he describes how the muses of Mount Helicon appeared to him while he was tending sheep and breathed into him the gift of prophecy, commanding him to sing of the gods. This claim of inspiration is more than literary convention. It establishes the Theogony as a kind of scripture, a revealed truth rather than mere human invention. When Hesiod tells us that chaos came first, he is not speculating or guessing. He is reporting what the goddesses of memory and artistic inspiration have told him directly. The structure of the theogony reflects its encyclopedic ambition. The poem begins with chaos and traces the emergence of the primordial gods: Gaia, earth; Tartarus, the pit; Eros, love; Erebus, darkness; and Nyx, night. From these first beings emerge subsequent generations: the Titans born of Gaia and Uranus, the Cyclopes, the hundred-handed giants, and eventually the Olympian gods who would rule the cosmos. The poem chronicles the conflicts between these generations: Cronus castrating and overthrowing his father Uranus, then Zeus and his siblings defeating and imprisoning the Titans, finally establishing the divine order that would persist through classical Greek civilization. But amid all these dramatic narratives of divine warfare and succession, the opening passages about chaos stand out for their simplicity and mystery. Hesiod does not tell stories about chaos. There are no myths of chaos interacting with other gods, no tales of chaos's adventures or emotions or desires. Chaos simply is, and then other things come to be. The relevant passage deserves to be quoted in full because its precise wording has generated centuries of scholarly debate. Verily at the first chaos came to be, but next wide-bosomed Gaia, the ever-sure foundations of all the deathless ones who hold the peaks of snowy Olympus, and dim Tartarus in the depth of the wide-pathed earth, and Eros, fairest among the deathless gods, who unnerves the limbs and overcomes the mind and wise counsels of all gods and all men within them. From chaos came forth Erebus and black night, but of night were born ether and day, whom she conceived and bore from union and love with Erebus. Notice what Hesiod does and does not say. He tells us that chaos came to be first, using a verb that implies origination rather than eternal existence. Something caused chaos to exist, or chaos emerged from some prior state, but Hesiod does not tell us what that something was. This has led some scholars to suggest that even chaos had a source, some principle even more fundamental that remains unnamed and perhaps unnameable. Then Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros appear, but Hesiod does not explicitly say they came from chaos. The word next suggests temporal sequence. They came after chaos, but not necessarily causal connection. They might be independent emanations from the same unknowable source, or they might be chaos's offspring in some mode of generation that Hesiod does not describe. Only with Erebus and Nyx does Hesiod make the parentage explicit. From chaos came forth Erebus and black night. These two, darkness and night, are the undisputed children of chaos, and they would go on to produce their own offspring, including some of the most important figures in the Greek cosmological system. This ambiguity about the relationship between chaos and the other primordial gods has generated enormous scholarly debate. Some interpreters argue that Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros should be understood as emerging from chaos, just as Erebus and Nyx explicitly do. The sequence of Hesiod's narrative, they argue, implies causation. First chaos, then everything else, with chaos as the ultimate source. Other scholars insist on taking Hesiod's language literally. Only Erebus and Nyx are said to come from chaos, so only they should be considered chaos's children. This debate might seem like academic hair-splitting, but it has real implications for how we understand Greek cosmology. If Gaia and Eros are children of chaos, then chaos is truly the parent of all things, the single source from which the entire universe derives. But if Gaia and Eros are independent of chaos, then the Greek cosmos has multiple ultimate sources, each contributing different fundamental aspects of reality. Chaos providing the void, Gaia the material foundation, Eros the force of attraction and connection. Modern scholars generally lean toward the latter interpretation, seeing chaos, Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros as a quartet of independent primordial principles that together constitute the ground of existence. Mitchell Miller, in an influential analysis, has argued that these four deities represent fundamental philosophical categories. Chaos embodies differentiation, the principle that separates and divides. Gaia embodies materiality, the solid ground of being. Tartarus embodies the undifferentiated depth, the opposite of form. And Eros embodies unification, the force that brings things together. The interplay of these four principles, separation and unity, form and formlessness, generates the entire cosmos. Whether or not we accept this particular philosophical reading, it captures something important about Hesiod's text. The Theogony is not merely a collection of colorful stories about divine beings. It is an attempt to understand the fundamental structure of reality, to answer the deepest questions about existence through the language of mythology. The figure of chaos stands at the center of this attempt. The first principle, the original state, the void from which meaning and matter alike emerge. Hesiod's influence on later Greek thought cannot be overstated. The Theogony became the standard reference for Greek mythology, the baseline against which later poets and philosophers measured their own cosmological speculations. When Plato mentions chaos, he is thinking of Hesiod. When the Roman poets tell their versions of creation, they are responding to Hesiod. Even the Orphic mysteries, which developed their own alternative cosmogonies, define themselves partly in relation to Hesiod's account. For us today, the Theogony offers a window into an ancient worldview that is both alien and familiar. Alien because it populates the cosmos with divine beings and explains natural phenomena through their actions and relationships. Familiar because it grapples with questions we still ask. What existed before the universe? How did order emerge from formlessness? Why is there something rather than nothing? Chaos, in Hesiod's account, does not answer these questions so much as mark their location. The primordial void is where questions about origins become unanswerable, where the chain of causation reaches its limit. Beyond chaos, we cannot go. With chaos, existence itself begins. From the primordial void of chaos emerged two children, and their names alone tell us something profound about the earliest state of the cosmos. They were Erebus and Nyx, darkness and night. Consider what this means. The first things to emerge from chaos were not light and day, not matter and form, but their opposites, the deep darkness that fills the spaces between things and the night that covers the world in shadow. For the Greeks, this made perfect sense. Light and day are not primary, they are secondary, emerging later from the union of darkness and night. The default state of existence is not illumination but obscurity. This ordering reflects something we might call mythological realism. The Greeks observed their world carefully, and they noticed that night comes before day in the natural cycle. Each new day begins at sunset, emerging from the darkness. They noticed that deep underground, in caves and chasms, darkness prevails regardless of what happens on the surface. They noticed that when you close your eyes, you see darkness, suggesting that darkness is somehow closer to consciousness than light. All these observations found expression in the mythology. Erebus and Nyx, children of the primordial void, are older and more fundamental than their bright offspring. Erebus, whose name simply means darkness in Greek, represents the absolute blackness of the deep places. Later authors would use his name as a synonym for the underworld itself, the realm of the dead that lies beneath the earth. But in Hesiod's cosmogony, Erebus is something more primal than the underworld. He is darkness itself, the absence of light that preceded the creation of the sun and stars. The word Erebus comes from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning darkness or gloom, and cognates appear across the ancient Indo-European languages. This linguistic evidence suggests that the concept of primordial darkness stretches back to the common ancestors of the Greeks, Indians, Persians, and Germanic peoples, a recognition, perhaps, that darkness is more fundamental than light in some cosmic sense. Nyx, night, is Erebus's sister and, in some accounts, his consort. She is one of the most fascinating figures in Greek mythology, a primordial goddess of immense power who plays a relatively small role in the major myths but casts a long shadow over the entire pantheon. Unlike many Greek deities, Nyx is rarely depicted with human characteristics or human stories. She does not fall in love with mortals, does not quarrel with other gods, does not intervene in the Trojan War or the adventures of heroes. She simply is night, personified and divine, older than almost everything else in existence. And yet, when Nyx does appear in the myths, her power is unmistakable. In one of the most remarkable passages in all of Greek literature, Homer's Iliad reveals that even Zeus, king of the gods, fears to displease Nyx. The story goes that Hera, Zeus's wife, once convinced the sleep god Hypnos to put Zeus into a slumber so she could work against his plans. When Zeus awoke and discovered what had happened, he was furious. He hunted for Hypnos throughout the heavens, intending to cast him into the sea. But Hypnos fled to his mother, Nyx, and there took refuge. And Zeus stopped. The king of the gods, the wielder of thunderbolts, the conqueror of the Titans, held back his wrath because he did not want to anger Night. Homer tells us that Zeus was in awe of doing anything to swift Night's displeasure. This is an extraordinary detail. Throughout Greek mythology, Zeus is depicted as the supreme deity, able to impose his will on gods and mortals alike. He has overthrown his father Cronus and cast the Titans into Tartarus. He has survived challenges from giants and monsters. He is not a god who hesitates or backs down. Yet confronted with Nyx, he retreats. Why? The mythological explanation is that Nyx's power is simply too ancient and too fundamental to challenge. She is not a god like the Olympians, born within the existing cosmic order. She is part of that order's foundation, older than Zeus's father Cronus, older than the Titans themselves. To attack Nyx would be to attack the structure of reality itself, and even Zeus cannot do that. But there may be a deeper symbolic meaning as well. Night represents mystery, the unknown, the limits of perception. In the darkness, forms dissolve, certainty vanishes, even the all-seeing eyes of the gods are limited. Zeus, for all his power, cannot see in the dark. Night thus represents a fundamental limit on divine knowledge and control, a reminder that even the highest gods exist within a cosmos they did not create and do not fully understand. Nyx's dwelling place reflects her mysterious nature. Hesiod describes her home at the far western edge of the world, where the sun sets and darkness begins. She shares this dwelling with her daughter Hemera, day, but the two are never home at the same time. Each day, when Hemera departs to spread light across the world, Nyx returns to the house. And when Hemera comes home at sunset, Nyx departs to cover the world in darkness. They pass each other at the threshold, the Theogony tells us, greeting one another as they exchange places. This image of Nyx and Hemera, mother and daughter, night and day, passing each other at a bronze threshold beneath the earth, is one of the most haunting in Greek mythology. It suggests that darkness and light are not enemies, but collaborators, taking turns in an eternal dance that gives rhythm to the cosmos. Neither can exist without the other. Their alternation is what creates the experience of time for mortal beings. And Nyx's children. We must speak of Nyx's children, because through them, she reaches into almost every aspect of human experience. Unlike most Greek deities, Nyx did not need a consort to produce offspring. She bore many of her children parthenogenetically, bringing them forth from herself alone. And what children they were. Hesiod provides a catalog that reads like an inventory of mortal fears and fascinations. Moros, doom, cur, fate, thanatos, death, hypnos, sleep, Dionyroi, dreams, momus, blame, oasis, misery, the Hesperides, the spirits of evening, the Moirai, the fates who control destiny, the Charis, spirits of violent death, Nemesis, divine retribution, Apate, deceit, Philides, affection, Geras, old age, and Eros, strife. What a list! Death and sleep, the twin brothers who come for us all. The fates who spin the thread of each mortal life, measure it out, and cut it when our time is done. Dreams that visit us in the darkness, bringing visions true and false. Old age that diminishes us. Strife that sets us against one another. Misery and doom and deceit. These are not minor spirits. They are the fundamental conditions of mortal existence, woven into the fabric of reality itself. And all of them are children of night. All of them emerge from darkness. There is a profound psychological truth here. The things we fear most, death, fate, the loss of control over our own lives, are associated with darkness in human consciousness. We are diurnal creatures who cannot see in the dark. Night brings vulnerability, uncertainty, the loss of the visual sense on which we depend. Small wonder that the Greeks imagined all these powers as children of Nyx, born from the primordial night that preceded the first dawn. But not all of Nyx's offspring are terrifying. Philides, affection, is among them, representing the tenderness that exists between lovers and friends. The Hesperides, spirits of the evening, guard a garden of golden apples at the far western edge of the world, and they represent the beauty that comes with twilight. Even hypnos, sleep, though sometimes frightening, for sleep is a little death, an extinguishing of consciousness, also brings rest and peace and dreams of better worlds. This duality in Nyx's children reflects the duality of night itself. Darkness can be terrifying, the time when predators hunt, when we lose our way, when our fears come to life. But darkness can also be comforting, the time when we rest from our labors, when lovers come together, when the harsh light of day softens into gentleness. Nyx, as the mother of both terrifying and gentle powers, embodies this complexity. Through Erebus and Nyx, Chaos's grandchildren came into being, beings who would shape the cosmos in profound ways. Ether, the bright upper air, and Hemera, day, were born from the union of darkness and night. This is itself a mystery. How could darkness and night, the deepest obscurity, produce light and day, the brightest illumination? The Greeks seem to understand that opposites generate each other, that darkness is the necessary precondition for light. Without night, there can be no dawn. Without void, there can be no form. The deepest truth, perhaps, is that existence depends on contrast, on the interplay of opposing principles. And so the cosmic family tree grew, branching outward from chaos through Erebus and Nyx to Ether and Hemera, and through Nyx's other children to all the forces that govern mortal life. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren of chaos would become the Titans, and then the Olympians, and then the heroes and mortals themselves. But all of them, in the end, trace their lineage back to the primordial void, the gaping emptiness from which all things emerged. We must pause here and dwell longer on Nyx, because she represents something remarkable in Greek mythology, a deity whose power seems to exceed even that of Zeus, the king of the gods. We have already mentioned the episode in the Iliad where Zeus hesitates to anger her. But this episode deserves deeper exploration because it reveals something essential about the Greek understanding of cosmic power. The story comes from Book 14 of the Iliad. The Trojan War has reached a critical juncture, and Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of the gods, wants to intervene against the Trojans, whom Zeus favors at this moment in the conflict. But she cannot act openly against her husband's will. So she hatches a scheme. She will seduce Zeus, and while he is distracted by their lovemaking, she will arrange for other gods to aid the Greeks. To make her plan work, Hera needs the god of sleep, Hypnos, to put Zeus into a deep slumber afterward. So she approaches Hypnos with her request, offering him a beautiful golden throne as payment. But Hypnos is reluctant. He reminds Hera that this is not the first time she has asked him to put Zeus to sleep. Once before, he did as she asked, allowing Hera to torment Heracles, Zeus's beloved mortal son. When Zeus awoke from that sleep, he was furious. He tore through the heavens hunting for Hypnos, throwing gods about like toys. He would have sunk me out of sight in the sea from the bright sky, Hypnos recalls, had not Night, who has power over gods and men, rescued me. Hypnos fled to his mother, and when he reached her, Zeus stopped. The all-powerful king of the gods, capable of defeating the Titans and imprisoning them in Tartarus, capable of fighting and winning against the monstrous Typhon, drew back from pursuing a minor god into the presence of Night. Homer's phrase is precise and telling. Zeus was in awe of doing anything to swift Night's displeasure, not in fear. Exactly. The Greek word implies reverence mixed with caution. Zeus does not fear Nyx the way a mortal might fear a god. He respects her, defers to her, acknowledges her power as somehow beyond his ability to challenge. Why should this be? The mythological answer is straightforward. Nyx is older than Zeus. She is a primordial deity, one of the first beings to emerge from chaos, while Zeus is several generations removed from that primal origin. In the logic of Greek mythology, older gods are generally more powerful, or at least more fundamental. Zeus rules the cosmos, but Nyx is part of the cosmos's foundation. To attack her would be like attacking the structure of reality itself. But there may be a deeper symbolism at work. Consider what night represents: darkness, obscurity, the limits of vision and knowledge. Even Zeus, who sees all things, cannot see in the dark. Night represents an intrinsic limit on divine power, a reminder that even the highest gods cannot illuminate everything. There will always be shadows, always places the light cannot reach. This limitation is not accidental. It is built into the structure of existence. Without night, there would be no rest. Without darkness, the contrast that gives meaning to light would disappear. Zeus may rule the bright Olympian day, but night rules a domain equally vast and equally essential. The two powers are not in competition, they are complementary. And Zeus, wise enough to understand this, does not attempt to extend his rule into Nyx's realm. The Orphic traditions, which developed their own alternative cosmogonies, placed even greater emphasis on Nyx's power. In some Orphic texts, Night is not merely a primordial deity, but the first deity, the original being from whom all others descend. She is described as the mother of Uranus and Gaia, reversing the genealogy found in Hesiod. She sits in a cave from which she dispenses prophecies, advising even the mighty gods on the course of fate. The Orphic hymns address Nyx with reverence. Night, parent goddess, source of sweet repose, from whom at first both gods and men arose. Here, Night is not merely a power among powers, but the source of all powers, the womb from which existence itself was born. Whether we follow Hesiod's genealogy, in which Nyx is daughter of Chaos and sister of Erebus, or the Orphic version, in which Nyx is even more primordial, the result is the same. Night holds a unique place in the Greek cosmos. She is not a personable deity like the Olympians, prone to love affairs and jealousies and petty rivalries. She is something older and stranger, a force of nature become divine, a mystery that cannot be dispelled because it is woven into the fabric of reality. And through Nyx, The power of chaos extends into every corner of existence. Her children, death, sleep, dreams, the fates, touch every mortal life. Her darkness returns each evening, a daily reminder that light is not permanent, that form yields eventually to formlessness, that every day's end is a small return to the primordial void. Nyx is the thread connecting the structured cosmos of gods and mortals to the unstructured chaos from which it came. In this sense, Nyx is perhaps the most present of all the primordial deities. Chaos is difficult to perceive directly. It is the absence rather than the presence of form. Gaia is omnipresent but taken for granted, the ground we walk on without thinking. Tartarus lies hidden in the depths, accessible only to the dead and the punished. But night comes every day, visible and tangible, spreading her dark veil across the sky, bringing dreams and rest, and, eventually, the longest sleep of all. The Greeks understood that you cannot defeat night. You cannot banish darkness permanently. You can only wait for it to pass, trusting that day will return to dispel it temporarily. This rhythm, darkness yielding to light yielding to darkness, is the heartbeat of existence, and it began with Nyx, daughter of chaos, older than Zeus, feared even by the king of the gods. If chaos is the great-grandparent of all that exists, and Erebus and Nyx are the grandparents, then Ether and Hemera represent a crucial generation, the emergence of light and day from primordial darkness. Hesiod tells us that Ether and Hemera were born to Nyx from union and love with Erebus. This is a remarkable detail. The very first act of sexual procreation in Greek mythology, the first union of male and female principles, produces not more darkness, but its opposite. From darkness and night, intertwined in love, comes upper light and day. The symbolism is profound. Opposition generates its contrary. The deepest night gives birth to the brightest dawn. Darkness is not the enemy of light, but its parent. This dialectical relationship, the way opposites emerge from each other, the way each extreme contains the seed of its reversal, would become a major theme in Greek philosophy. Heraclitus would later proclaim that the way up and the way down are the same, that all things flow into their opposites, that the cosmos is sustained by the tension of contraries. But this philosophical insight has its mythological precursor here, in the union of Erebus and Nyx producing Ether and Hemera. Ether represents the upper air, not the heavy atmosphere near the ground where clouds form and rain falls, but the bright, pure air of the heavens where the gods dwell and the stars shine. In Greek cosmology, the universe was layered. Below was the earth, then the lower air, called air, then the bright upper air, ether, and finally the boundary of the sky itself. Ether was the element breathed by the gods, the medium of divine existence, the luminous substance from which the heavens were made. Hemera, day, is equally fundamental. She is not the sun. That role belongs to Helios, a later deity, but rather the light that fills the sky when darkness withdraws. The Greeks distinguished between the source of light, the sun, and light itself, day, a subtle but important distinction. Day is not simply what happens when the sun rises. It is an independent power, a goddess who actively drives away her mother night each morning. Hesiod's description of the relationship between Nyx and Hemera is one of the most poetic passages in the Theogony. He tells us that both goddesses share a dwelling in the far west, at the edge of the world where the sky meets the earth. But they are never home together. When Hemera returns from spreading light across the world, Nyx is departing to cover the world in darkness. When Nyx returns at dawn, Hemera is setting out on her daily journey. And the house never holds them both within, Hesiod writes, but always one is without the house passing over the earth, while the other stays at home and waits until the time for her journeying comes. This image captures something essential about the Greek understanding of cosmic order. Day and night are not adversaries fighting for supremacy. They are collaborators in a shared task, taking turns to give rhythm to existence. Their alternation is not a battle but a dance, choreographed from the beginning of time. The threshold they cross each day is a liminal space, a point of transition where darkness becomes light and light becomes darkness. And notice where this threshold lies. In the underworld, at the far western edge of the cosmos, near the house of chaos itself. The daily cycle of light and darkness thus connects the surface world of mortals to the primordial depths from which everything emerged. Every sunset is a return to origins. Every dawn is a new emergence from the void. Through ether and hemera, the lineage of chaos extends into the visible cosmos. But these are not the only grandchildren of the primordial void. Nyx's other offspring, those she bore without a consort, also represent a kind of grandchildren of chaos, and they would shape human experience in countless ways. Consider the Moirai, the Fates, whom some accounts name as daughters of Nyx. These three sisters, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, control the destiny of every mortal. Clotho spins the thread of life at birth, Lachesis measures out its length, and Atropos cuts it at death. Even the gods are subject to their decrees. Zeus himself cannot change what the Fates have ordained. The Fates represent the most terrifying aspect of the Greek cosmos, the conviction that our lives are not entirely in our own hands. No matter how wisely we choose, no matter how bravely we act, we cannot escape the lot that was measured out for us at birth. This fatalism runs deep in Greek thought, appearing in tragedy after tragedy as heroes struggle against destinies they cannot change. And the Fates are children of night, grandchildren of chaos. They emerged from the primordial darkness, these measurers of human life. They were there before the first mortal drew breath, waiting to receive each new thread and determine its length. The cosmic order that seems so structured and rational, the hierarchy of gods, the succession of generations, the laws that govern nature, is built atop this foundation of fate, this power that predates even Zeus and cannot be challenged. Similarly, Thanatos, death, and his twin brother Hypnos, sleep, are numbered among Nyx's children. Death comes for all mortals, an inescapable consequence of having been born. Sleep comes each night, a temporary death that reminds us of the permanent one awaiting us. The Greeks imagined these twins as peaceful figures, unlike the violent Charis who bring death in battle. Thanatos, in particular, was depicted as gentle, a calm presence who simply brings release from suffering. But gentle or not, death is a grandchild of chaos. When we die, we return in some sense to the void from which we came. The thread is cut, the form dissolves, and what remains descends to the underworld, closer to the primordial foundations of existence. Death is not the end of the cosmic journey, but a stage in it, a return to the deeper levels of reality from which we briefly emerged. The family tree grows more complex as we trace it further. Hemera and Ether have their own children in some accounts. Gaia, who may or may not be Chaos's offspring, bears children both with and without consorts, including Uranus, Heaven, who becomes her lover and the father of the Titans. The Titans in turn produce the Olympian gods, who defeat and imprison them, establishing the current cosmic order. But through all these generations, the line back to chaos remains clear. Zeus may sit on the throne of Olympus, but his great-great-grandmother was night, and her mother was chaos. The thunderbolts that Zeus wields are powerful, but the power of the void that preceded everything is more fundamental still. This is why even Zeus hesitates before Nyx, not because she could defeat him in battle, but because she represents something he cannot touch, a stratum of reality below the level where his authority operates. The Greek cosmos, for all its elaborate hierarchy of gods and spirits, rests on this primordial foundation. Chaos, Erebus, Nyx, Ether, Hemera, the Fates, death, sleep. These are not characters in dramatic stories, but the deep structures of existence itself. The myths about Zeus and Hera, about heroes and monsters, about love and war, all of these play out on a stage constructed from more fundamental realities. And those realities trace back, ultimately, to the gaping void that was the beginning of everything. We have spoken extensively of chaos and its definite offspring, Erebus and Nyx. But we must now address a question that has puzzled scholars since antiquity. What is the relationship between chaos and the other primordial beings who appear in Hesiod's cosmogony? Gaia, Earth, Tartarus, the Pit, and Eros, love? The text of the Theogony is ambiguous on this point. After telling us that chaos came first, Hesiod writes that next came Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros. But does next mean born from, or simply after? Are these beings children of chaos, or are they independent emanations from the same unknowable source that produced chaos itself? This might seem like a minor textual question, but it has significant implications for how we understand Greek cosmology. If Gaia and the others are children of chaos, then chaos is truly the single origin of all things, the one from which the many derive. But if they are independent, then the Greek cosmos has multiple ultimate principles, each contributing different aspects of reality. Let us consider each of these primordial beings in turn. Gaia, Earth, is described by Hesiod as the ever-sure foundations of all the deathless ones who hold the peaks of snowy Olympus. She is stability, solidity, the ground on which all else is built. Without Gaia, the gods would have nowhere to stand. The whole structure of the cosmos would collapse. She is the nurturing mother, but also the implacable foundation, unmoved and unmoving. Unlike chaos, Gaia actively participates in the myths. She is a character with agency, emotions, and relationships. She gives birth to Uranus, heaven, without a consort, and then mates with him to produce the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the hundred-handed giants. When Uranus proves to be a cruel father, stuffing his children back into Gaia's womb rather than letting them be born, it is Gaia who plots his downfall. She forges the sickle of adamant and gives it to her son Cronus, who uses it to castrate Uranus and seize power. This active, scheming Gaia seems very different from the passive void of chaos. She is fertile where chaos is empty, form where chaos is formlessness. If Gaia is chaos's daughter, the contrast between them is remarkable, perhaps representing the emergence of structure from structurelessness. But if Gaia is chaos's equal, independently originated, then the contrast represents a fundamental duality at the heart of existence: void and form, emptiness and plenitude, the gap and the ground. Tartarus is equally mysterious. Hesiod describes it as dim Tartarus in the depth of the wide-pathed earth, suggesting it is beneath Gaia. Yet the grammar of the passage places Tartarus alongside Gaia and Eros as a primordial being. Later in the Theogony, Hesiod describes Tartarus in more detail. It is a great pit, so deep that a bronze anvil falling from heaven would fall 9 days before reaching Earth, and 9 more days from Earth to Tartarus. It is the prison of the Titans after their defeat by Zeus, a place of darkness and punishment. Some scholars interpret Tartarus as simply a place, the deepest underworld, beneath even Hades. But Hesiod's language suggests it is also a being, a personified depth that participates in cosmic generation. Tartarus mates with Gaia to produce Typhon, the monstrous challenger of Zeus, and in some accounts other giants as well. This active role suggests that Tartarus is not merely a location but a power, a principle of depth and darkness complementing Gaia's surface and solidity. If Tartarus is a sibling of chaos rather than a child, then the Greek cosmos has two fundamental voids: chaos as the gap or chasm, and Tartarus as the pit or depth. But if Tartarus derives from chaos, then the pit is an extension of the chasm, a localized intensification of the primordial emptiness in the lowest depths of the world. And then there is Eros, perhaps the most puzzling of these primordial beings. Hesiod describes him as fairest among the deathless gods, who unnerves the limbs and overcomes the mind and wise counsels of all gods and all men within them. This is the cosmic Eros, the principle of attraction and desire that draws beings together and makes generation possible. Very different from the winged boy with Eros who appears in later mythology as Aphrodite's son. Why should Eros be primordial? The Greek answer seems to be that without desire, without the force that draws things together, nothing could emerge from the void. Chaos by itself is mere emptiness. Gaia by herself is mere matter. Tartarus by itself is mere depth. But Eros is the force that makes them interact, that causes being to seek being, that brings forth generation from the union of opposites. In this sense, Eros is the most active of the primordial principles. Chaos provides space, Gaia provides substance, Tartarus provides depth, but Eros provides the dynamic force that sets everything in motion. Without Eros, the cosmos would be static, a collection of powers that never interact. With Eros, everything changes. Night loves darkness, and from their union comes light. Earth loves heaven, and from their union come the Titans. The wheel of generation begins to turn, and the cosmos populates itself with gods and monsters, and eventually mortals. The philosopher Mitchell Miller has offered an influential analysis of these four primordial beings as representing fundamental philosophical principles. According to Miller, chaos represents differentiation, the principle that separates and divides, that creates the gaps between things. Gaia represents matter or substance, the stuff of existence. Tartarus represents the undifferentiated, the unlimited depth that exists below all form. And Eros represents unification, the force that brings divided things back together. These four principles, in Miller's reading, generate the cosmos through their interaction. Differentiation and unification, form and formlessness, work against and with each other to produce the structured world we inhabit. The Greek creation myth is not just a sequence of divine births, but a philosophical statement about the fundamental dynamics of existence. Whether or not we accept this particular interpretation, it captures something important about the relationship between chaos and the other primordial beings. Even if we cannot determine their exact genealogical relationship, we can see that they represent complementary principles. Chaos alone could not create a cosmos. You need earth and depth and desire as well. The void must be filled, the chasm must be crossed, the separated must be reunited. And this process, the emergence of structure from structurelessness, of form from formlessness, is what the Greek creation myth is ultimately about. The ambiguity in Hesiod's text may be intentional. Perhaps the poet understood that at the deepest level of origins, our categories break down. Is Gaia born from chaos or alongside it? The question may be unanswerable because it assumes a clear distinction between from and alongside that does not exist at the primordial level. Before there were clear boundaries between things, before differentiation itself came into being, how could we distinguish parent from sibling, cause from coexistence? This is the mystery at the heart of any creation account. How do we speak of what existed before the conditions for speech itself were established? The Greeks answered with mythology, naming the unnameable, personifying the impersonal, telling stories about realities that precede all stories. Chaos, Gaia, Tartarus, Eros. These are attempts to reach toward that primordial mystery, to give us something to contemplate when we ask the ultimate questions. While Hesiod's theogony represents the standard Greek creation myth, it was not the only cosmogony known to the ancient Greeks. A parallel tradition, associated with the legendary poet Orpheus, developed its own account of origins, one that placed even greater emphasis on the role of chaos and darkness in cosmic creation. The Orphic mysteries were religious cults that flourished in ancient Greece from at least the 6th century BCE. They took their name from Orpheus, the mythical musician whose singing could charm beasts, trees, and even stones, and who famously descended to the underworld to retrieve his dead wife Eurydice. According to the Orphics, Orpheus had received special revelations about the nature of the cosmos and the fate of the soul, which he encoded in poems and hymns passed down through initiated disciples. The Orphic cosmogony differs from Hesiod's in several striking ways. Most importantly, it gives a central role to a being called Phans, also known as Protogonos, firstborn, who emerges from a cosmic egg and becomes the creator of all subsequent gods. This cosmic egg, the famous Orphic egg, is one of the most distinctive elements of the tradition. In one version of the Orphic cosmogony, the sequence begins with Kronos, not the Titan Cronus who ate his children, but an earlier, more abstract figure representing time itself. Kronos is often described as a serpent winding around the cosmos, coiled together with his consort Ananke, necessity. Together, time and necessity create a cosmic egg within the upper air, and from this egg hatches Phans. Phans is described as radiant and golden-winged, an androgynous being containing both male and female principles. His name means to shine or to appear, suggesting that he is the principle of manifestation, the emergence of visible form from invisible potential. In some accounts, Phans is identified with Eros or with Dionysus, connecting him to both the principle of desire and the ecstatic god of the mysteries. After his emergence, Phans becomes the first ruler of the cosmos. He is the creator of the other gods, including Nyx, night, who is sometimes described as his daughter and sometimes as his consort. Phans eventually passes his scepter to Nyx, who passes it to her son Uranus, who is overthrown by Cronus, who is overthrown by Zeus. But Zeus, in a remarkable twist, swallows Phans whole, absorbing all his power and becoming the ultimate ruler of the cosmos. What role does chaos play in this alternative cosmogony? The sources are inconsistent, but several versions place chaos as one of the first beings to emerge from Kronos, alongside Ether and Erebus. In this schema, chaos represents the lower air, the misty, dark atmosphere between earth and heaven, rather than the primordial void of Hesiod's account. Other Orphic sources, however, seem to treat chaos more in line with Hesiod's conception. A fragment preserved by Alexander of Aphrodisias says that Orpheus, too, begins with chaos. And the Clementine Homilies, a late text that preserves some Orphic material, describes chaos as flowing and swirling, a dynamic rather than static void. The Orphic tradition's most distinctive contribution is the image of the cosmic egg. This symbol appears in creation myths from many cultures: Egyptian, Hindu, Chinese, Finnish, suggesting something universal about the image of the universe emerging from an egg. The egg represents potentiality, gestation, the gathering of forces before the moment of emergence. When the egg hatches, the cosmos is born. Phans breaks through the shell, and light fills the darkness. Some scholars have suggested that the Orphic cosmogony represents an Eastern influence on Greek thought, perhaps brought from Persia or Egypt through trade and cultural contact. The emphasis on a primordial creator god, the cosmic egg, the swallowing and incorporation of earlier divine powers. These elements have parallels in Near Eastern mythology that may reflect actual historical connections. But whatever its origins, The Orphic tradition offers a vision of creation that complements and contrasts with Hesiod's account, where Hesiod's chaos is purely passive, a void from which things emerge but which does not itself act. The Orphic cosmogony is more dynamic, full of swirling, generating, transforming forces, where Hesiod gives us genealogy, who was born from whom. The Orphics give us something more like alchemy, the transformation of primordial substances into increasingly ordered forms. The Orphic mysteries also differed from mainstream Greek religion in their emphasis on individual salvation. For most Greeks, the afterlife was a grim affair, a dim existence in the underworld, a shadow of mortal life. But the Orphics believed that the soul was divine, trapped in the body as a kind of punishment, and that through proper ritual purification and mystical knowledge, one could escape the cycle of rebirth and return to the divine realm. This belief in the soul's divine origin connects to the Orphic cosmogony. If Phans is the source of all divine power, and Zeus has absorbed Phans, then everything divine ultimately derives from that primordial light. The human soul, in the Orphic view, contains a spark of that light, a fragment of Phans imprisoned in matter. By understanding the true nature of the cosmos and one's place in it, by participating in the mysteries and receiving the sacred knowledge, one could awaken that spark and achieve liberation. The Orphic tradition thus offers a more hopeful vision than Hesiod's. In the theogony, chaos is simply the beginning. There is no suggestion that we might return to it or transcend its offspring. But in Orpheism, the primordial state holds promise as well as mystery. The darkness from which light emerged is not merely our origin, but potentially our destination, transformed and purified, freed from the cycle of birth and death. Plato was deeply influenced by Orphic ideas, though he rarely attributes them explicitly. His dialogues are full of mythical accounts of the soul's journey, the cosmic order, the relationship between the visible world and a higher realm of forms. The Timaeus, with its account of the demiurge fashioning the world from chaotic matter, owes much to Orphic cosmogony. And the Phaedrus, with its image of the soul as a charioteer driving toward the heavens, reflects the Orphic hope for divine return. Through Plato, Orphic ideas entered mainstream Western philosophy, and from there influenced early Christianity, Gnosticism, and the mystical traditions of the Middle Ages. The cosmic egg appears in alchemical symbolism. The idea of a hidden light within matter appears in Kabbalah and Hermeticism. The hope for liberation from the material world appears in countless spiritual traditions. All of this traces back, in some fashion, to those ancient Greek attempts to understand what existed before the world began. Chaos, whether understood as Hesiod's void or the Orphic's dynamic swirl, represents the ultimate question. What is the ground of existence? What existed before anything existed? How can something come from nothing? The Orphics answered with their egg and their Phans, their mysteries and their hopes of salvation. But like Hesiod, they understood that any answer must begin with acknowledging mystery, with confronting the unthinkable, with naming what cannot truly be named. Chaos, in both traditions, marks the limit of knowledge, the point beyond which we cannot see but toward which we must reach. When the Roman poet Ovid began his metamorphoses around the turn of the first millennium, he faced the challenge of retelling Greek mythology for a Roman audience. This was not simply a matter of translation. Ovid brought his own philosophical perspective, his own literary sensibility, and his own culture's understanding of the cosmos to the task. And nowhere is his distinctive voice more evident than in his treatment of chaos. Ovid's Metamorphoses opens with one of the most famous creation accounts in Western literature. "Before the sea and the lands and the sky that covers all," he writes, "there was one face of nature in her whole orb, which they call chaos, a rough, unordered mass, nothing except inactive weight, and heaped together the discordant seeds of unassembled things." Notice how different this is from Hesiod. For Hesiod, chaos is a gap, a void, an absence. For Ovid, chaos is a rough, unordered mass, a substance containing all the elements in confused combination. Where Hesiod's chaos is empty, Ovid's is full, crowded with matter that has not yet been sorted into its proper forms. This shift reflects developments in Greek philosophy that occurred between Hesiod's time, around 700 BCE, and Ovid's, around 1 CE. Thinkers like Anaxagoras had proposed that the cosmos began as a mixture of all things, which was then separated and organized by a cosmic intelligence, nous. The Stoics had developed theories of cosmic cycles in which matter is periodically dissolved into a primordial substance and then reformed. Ovid's chaos reflects these philosophical influences, presenting the original state not as void, but as undifferentiated matter. Ovid continues his description. Though land and sea and air were present, none could use the land, or swim the sea, or float in air. Land was unstable, the sea not fit for swimming, the air lacked light. In Ovid's vision, all the elements exist before creation, but they are not yet separated into their proper domains. Earth and water and fire and air are mixed together, unable to fulfill their natural functions. Then comes the Creator, this strife a god, with nature's blessing, solved, who severed land from sky and sea from land, and from the denser vapors set apart the ethereal sky. Ovid does not name this god. He refers only to whatever god it was, but the figure functions like the Platonic demiurge, imposing order on chaos, separating the elements, establishing the structure of the cosmos. The sequence of creation in Ovid follows a rational progression. First, the elements are separated and placed in their proper positions. The light, fiery element rises to form the heavens. The air takes its place below. The water collects in the seas. The heavy earth settles at the center. Then the surface of the earth is shaped, with mountains rising and valleys forming. Then come the stars and planets, the fish and beasts, and finally humankind. This ordered creation from disordered matter represents a significant departure from Hesiod's genealogical model. In the theogony, the cosmos emerges through birth and generation, through the union of divine beings producing offspring. It is a biological process, gods begetting gods in an ever more complex family tree. In the Metamorphoses, creation is more like craftsmanship, the imposition of form on formless matter by an intelligent designer. Ovid's conception would have enormous influence on later Western thought. Medieval Christian scholars, seeking to harmonize classical learning with biblical teaching, found Ovid's creator god relatively compatible with the God of Genesis. The idea of creation as the ordering of chaos, which also appears in some readings of the Bible, became a dominant paradigm for understanding both divine creation and human artistic endeavor. But Ovid's chaos also became the source of our modern meaning of the word. When Ovid describes chaos as a rough, unordered mass with discordant seeds, he establishes the association between chaos and confusion that persists to this day. The English word chaos, borrowed from Greek through Latin, carries Ovid's interpretation rather than Hesiod's. When we speak of a chaotic situation, we mean something messy and disordered, not empty and void. This linguistic shift is itself a kind of metamorphosis, the transformation of chaos from void to mess, from absence to confused presence. It is fitting that this transformation should occur in a poem about transformations, a work that takes change itself as its central theme. The Metamorphoses is full of beings changing shape. Men become animals, women become trees, gods take on mortal forms. And in its opening, the entire cosmos undergoes the primal metamorphosis, from formless chaos to ordered world. Ovid's relationship to his material was complex. Writing in sophisticated Augustan Rome, He approached the old myths with a mixture of reverence and irony. He was not a believer in the literal truth of these stories. He was a poet using them as vehicles for meditation on themes like love, power, and change. His chaos is less a theological concept than a literary device, a starting point for a narrative that will sweep through all the ages of the world. Yet even Ovid's literary chaos retains some of the mystery of Hesiod's primordial void. Before the creator god imposes order, the elements are at war with each other, unable to find stable form. Cold fought with heat, Ovid writes, moist with dry, soft with hard, and heavy with weightless things. This war of opposites suggests something deeper than mere confusion, a fundamental tension in the nature of reality that must be resolved before ordered existence can begin. In Ovid's cosmos, as in Hesiod's, chaos represents the precondition for existence. Whether understood as void or mess, as absence or undifferentiated presence, chaos marks the state that preceded the world we know. The cosmos is cosmos, Greek for order, precisely because it has emerged from chaos. Without that starting point, there would be nothing to order, nothing to transform, nothing to metamorphose. The Roman reception of Greek mythology was never simple imitation. Ovid and his contemporaries inherited a rich tradition, but they made it their own. Their chaos is different from Hesiod's, just as their Jupiter is different from Zeus, their Venus different from Aphrodite. In absorbing Greek culture, Rome transformed it, adapting ancient myths to new philosophical frameworks and literary sensibilities. And so the history of chaos includes this transformation, from Greek chaos to Roman chaos, from void to confusion, from the gaping chasm of Hesiod to the rough mass of Ovid. Both conceptions continue to influence how we think about origins and order, about what existed before existence, about the fundamental nature of the cosmos we inhabit. The poetic beauty of Ovid's account should not be underestimated. His description of chaos as a rude and undeveloped mass, a lifeless lump, unfashioned and unframed, of jarring seeds, has inspired artists and writers for 2,000 years. The image is vivid, tactile almost. You can imagine reaching out and touching this primordial substance, feeling its resistance to form, sensing the potential within it waiting to be released. Ovid's creator god does not speak the world into being, as in Genesis. Instead, he works like a craftsman, separating and arranging, imposing shape on shapeless matter. This vision of creation as labor, as craft, as the patient imposition of design on resistant material resonates with human experience. We know what it is to bring order out of confusion, to shape meaning from mess. Ovid's cosmology makes the divine creator comprehensible by making him like us, a worker, a maker, an orderer. But there is also something troubling in this vision. If order must be imposed on chaos, then chaos remains as a constant threat, a state to which things might return if the ordering force relaxes its grip. The universe is not inherently ordered. It is ordered against its natural tendency. This implies a kind of cosmic anxiety, a recognition that the structures we depend on are achievements rather than givens, maintained by effort rather than guaranteed by nature. The Stoics, whose philosophy influenced Ovid, embraced this vision. They believe that the cosmos periodically dissolves into fire and is then reborn, cycling eternally between order and dissolution. For them, cosmic conflagration was not a disaster, but a natural phase, part of the eternal rhythm of existence. Ovid hints at this possibility in his later description of the four ages, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, in which humanity progressively degenerates from primordial innocence to current corruption. The Metamorphoses, taken as a whole, is a meditation on change. Everything transforms: bodies, identities, nations, the cosmos itself. Chaos, in this context, is both the origin and the ever-present possibility, the formless state from which forms emerge and to which they might return. The stories of transformation that fill the poem are, in a sense, small echoes of that primordial transformation when chaos became cosmos. The mythological conception of chaos did not exist in isolation. As Greek culture developed, philosophers began to ask the same questions that mythology addressed, but they sought answers in rational terms rather than divine narratives. The relationship between these two modes of thought, mythos and logos, story and reason, is one of the great dramas of Western intellectual history, and chaos sits at the intersection of them. The earliest Greek philosophers, known as the pre-Socratics, were obsessed with the question of origins. What is the fundamental substance from which all things derive? Is there a single principle underlying the multiplicity of the world? These questions emerged directly from the mythological tradition. They are essentially the same questions Hesiod addressed in the Theogony, but the pre-Socratics sought naturalistic rather than supernatural answers. Thales of Miletus, traditionally considered the first Western philosopher, proposed that water was the fundamental substance. Everything comes from water and returns to water. The variations we see in the world are variations in water's form. This might seem naive, but it represents a revolutionary intellectual move, explaining the diversity of nature through a single natural principle rather than through the actions of multiple gods. Anaximander, Thales' student, objected that water was too specific to be the fundamental substance. If everything comes from water, what accounts for fire, which is the opposite of water? Instead, Anaximander proposed the apeiron, the unlimited or indefinite. This boundless something, which has no specific qualities, gives rise to all the specific things we observe. Things emerge from the apeiron and eventually return to it. The apeiron bears a striking resemblance to chaos. Both are primordial, preceding the differentiated world. Both lack specific form or character. Both serve as the ground from which ordered existence emerges. Some scholars believe that Anaximander was directly influenced by the mythological conception of chaos, translating it into philosophical terms. Others argue that both mythology and philosophy are responding to the same intuition, that beneath the world of distinct things lies something indistinct from which they all derive. Anaximenes, the third of the Milesian philosophers, proposed air as the fundamental substance, with all things arising from its rarefaction and condensation. Heraclitus of Ephesus identified fire as primary and emphasized constant change. Parmenides of Elea denied change altogether, arguing that only unchanging being is real. Each of these philosophers was grappling with the same basic problem: how to account for the multiplicity and change we observe in terms of some more fundamental reality. The philosopher Heraclitus took a particularly interesting approach. For Heraclitus, the fundamental principle is not a substance, but a process, change itself, which he sometimes identified with fire. All things flow, he proclaimed, nothing stays the same. The cosmos is in constant flux, a dynamic interplay of opposites that generates the appearance of stable objects. In Heraclitus's vision, there is no stable ground, no primordial stuff that underlies change. Change is the ground, flux is fundamental. Yet even Heraclitus speaks of a cosmic order underlying the flux. He calls this order the logos, a term that means word, reason, and pattern all at once. The logos is the law that governs change, the principle by which opposites generate each other. In this sense, Heraclitus's cosmos has emerged from chaos, understood as undifferentiated flux, into order, understood as the logos that governs change. The pattern is different from Hesiod's, but the basic movement, from formlessness to form, is the same. Parmenides, Heraclitus's contemporary and philosophical opponent, took the opposite approach. For Parmenides, change is impossible. What exists is one, unchanging, and eternal. The multiplicity and change we seem to perceive are illusions, the way things appear rather than the way things truly are. Behind the apparent chaos of becoming lies the stillness of being. This Parmenidean vision would influence Plato's theory of forms. For Plato, the physical world we inhabit is a realm of shadows, imperfect copies of eternal, unchanging forms. The forms exist in a higher realm, perfect and immutable, while the material world is in constant flux, never fully actualizing the perfection of the forms. In this schema, something like chaos persists in the material world as the principle of imperfection and change, while the realm of forms represents the ultimate order. Plato's Timaeus offers the most developed ancient philosophical account of creation. The dialogue presents a story, explicitly a likely story, not a certain truth, in which a divine craftsman, the demiurge, fashions the world from pre-existing matter. This matter is not exactly chaos, but it functions similarly. It is formless, chaotic, containing traces of the elements in disordered motion. The demiurge looks to the eternal forms as patterns and imposes their order on the disorderly material, creating the cosmos we inhabit. The Platonic chora, the term for this primal matter, is described as a receptacle for becoming, a kind of cosmic womb in which things take shape. It has no form of its own but can receive all forms. It is not quite nothing, but not quite something either, an intermediate state between being and non-being. This sounds very much like a philosophical refinement of the mythological chaos. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a more systematic approach to these questions. In his Physics, Aristotle directly addresses Hesiod's conception of chaos. He notes that Hesiod seems to understand chaos as a kind of space or place, the room in which things exist. This interpretation treats chaos not as a substance, but as a precondition, the emptiness that must exist for other things to exist within it. Aristotle argues that this conception is problematic. If chaos is simply void, then it exists independently of bodies, yet bodies depend on it for their existence. But what kind of existence does empty space have? Is it something or nothing? These questions, Aristotle notes, arise from treating chaos as a physical reality rather than a mythological figure. They become the starting points for his own investigation of place, motion, and the nature of the infinite. The atomists, Leucippus and Democritus, proposed yet another solution. For them, reality consists of atoms, tiny, indivisible particles, moving through void. The void is necessary for motion. Without empty space, atoms could not move. This void is not quite Hesiod's chaos, but it serves a similar function. It is the emptiness that makes the fullness of the world possible. Epicurus, following the atomists, developed an entire philosophy based on atoms and void. The universe, for Epicurus, is infinite, containing infinite atoms moving through infinite void. There is no creator, no purpose, no divine plan. Order arises spontaneously from the random collisions of atoms. In this radically naturalistic vision, something like chaos persists forever, not as a primordial state that was overcome, but as the void that always exists alongside matter. The Stoics, whose philosophy would dominate the Hellenistic and Roman periods, developed a different cosmology. They believed in a living cosmos, animated by a divine principle they called pneuma or logos. This cosmic mind permeates all things, organizing matter into rational structures. But the Stoics also believed in cosmic cycles. Periodically, the cosmos is consumed by fire, ekpyrosis, and then regenerated. In this vision, the ordered cosmos is temporary, giving way to a kind of fiery chaos before being reformed. What emerges from this survey is a picture of ancient philosophy in dialogue with ancient mythology. The philosophers were not simply rejecting the myths. They were translating them into new terms, asking the same questions in different ways. Chaos, in this context, is not just a mythological figure, but a philosophical problem. The problem of origins, of the relationship between order and disorder, of how the complex world we experience arises from simpler principles. The philosophers did not solve these problems definitively. They offered various answers, debated among themselves, refined and revised their positions. But they bequeathed to Western civilization a set of questions and concepts that continue to structure our thinking about the cosmos. And at the heart of these questions stands the figure of chaos, the primordial void that Hesiod named and that philosophers have been grappling with ever since. The Greek conception of chaos did not emerge in isolation. Ancient Greece was part of a broader Mediterranean world, connected by trade and cultural exchange to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. Scholars have long recognized parallels between Greek mythology and the myths of these neighboring civilizations. The question of how much the Greeks borrowed from their neighbors and what they made of what they borrowed remains a subject of lively scholarly debate. The Egyptian creation myths center on Nun, the primordial waters. Before anything existed, according to Egyptian cosmology, there was an infinite, dark, watery abyss. From these waters emerged the first god, Adam, who stood on a mound of earth, the Binbin, and began the work of creation. Adam created the god Shu, air, and the goddess Tefnut, moisture, and from them descended all the other gods and eventually the physical world. The parallels with Greek cosmogony are striking. Both traditions imagine a primordial state that precedes the differentiated cosmos. Both see creation as a process of emergence, gods arising from the primal element and then producing further generations. Both associate the primordial state with darkness and formlessness. Yet there are differences. The Egyptian Nun is explicitly watery, a cosmic ocean. Hesiod's chaos is more abstract, a chasm or void rather than a substance. The Egyptians imagined the primordial waters as surrounding and supporting the cosmos even after creation. The world floats on Nun and is sustained by it. The Greek chaos, by contrast, seems to recede once creation begins, becoming a distant origin rather than an ongoing presence. The Egyptian creation account also differs in its emphasis on the sun. Ra, the sun god, plays a central role in Egyptian cosmology, driving his chariot across the sky each day and battling the forces of chaos each night. The daily journey of the sun was seen as a repetition of the original creation, a constant reassertion of order against the ever-present threat of dissolution. This cyclical vision differs from the more linear Greek conception, in which creation happens once and then the cosmos proceeds through its generations. The Babylonian creation myth, known as the Enuma Elish, presents another set of parallels. This epic, composed perhaps in the late 2nd millennium BCE, tells the story of the god Marduk's rise to supremacy among the gods. But it begins with a creation account that bears interesting resemblances to both Egyptian and Greek traditions. In the beginning, according to the Enuma Elish, there was only water, the salt water Tiamat, female, and the fresh water Apsu, male. From their mingling, the first gods were born. But these younger gods were noisy and disruptive, disturbing Apsu's rest. Apsu plotted to destroy them, but the god Ea discovered the plot and killed Apsu first. This provoked Tiamat's wrath, leading to a cosmic battle in which Marduk, Ea's son, defeated and killed Tiamat. From her body, Marduk created the heavens and the earth. The parallels to Greek succession myths are obvious. In both traditions, younger gods overthrow or defeat older divine powers. In both, the cosmos as we know it emerges from this conflict. The castration of Uranus by Cronus, the defeat of Cronus by Zeus, the battle against the Titans. All these echo the pattern of divine succession found in the Enuma Elish. But what about chaos specifically? Tiamat is sometimes described as representing chaos, particularly in her aspect as a dragon or serpent of the waters. When Marduk defeats her, he is imposing order on chaos, subduing the primal power to create structured existence. This interpretation sees Tiamat as a functional equivalent to chaos, the formless or disordered state that must be overcome for cosmos to emerge. Yet Tiamat is a very different figure from Hesiod's chaos. She is active, angry, a warrior who fights against the younger gods. Chaos is passive, impersonal, more a condition than a character. Tiamat is killed. Chaos simply exists as the ground from which other things emerge. The Babylonian myth imagines creation as conflict and conquest. The Greek myth, at least in Hesiod's version, imagines it as generation and emergence. The Hebrew Bible offers yet another parallel. The opening of Genesis describes the earth as without form and void, in Hebrew, tohu wabohu, with darkness upon the face of the deep, tiham. The word tiham is linguistically related to Tiamat, suggesting some connection between Hebrew and Babylonian cosmological traditions. Yet the Genesis account differs dramatically in its theology. God creates by speaking, and there is no conflict or violence in the process. The Hebrew creation account is notable for its monotheism and its emphasis on divine sovereignty. God does not battle chaos. God simply commands, and the world comes to be. Let there be light, and there is light. This vision of creation through divine fiat differs from both the Babylonian conflict model and the Greek genealogical model. Yet all three traditions share the basic pattern: a primordial state of formlessness or darkness, followed by the emergence of ordered existence. Norse mythology provides a fascinating northern parallel. The primordial state in Norse cosmology is Ginnungagap, the yawning void between the realms of fire, Muspelheim, and ice, Niflheim. When the heat of the fire met the cold of the ice, the giant Ymir was formed from the melting frost. Ymir was then killed by the gods Odin, Vili, and Ve, and from his body they made the world, his flesh becoming the earth, his blood the seas, his skull the sky. The Norse Ginnungagap bears a striking resemblance to the Greek chaos. Both are described as yawning or gaping voids. Some scholars believe this parallel reflects a common Proto-Indo-European inheritance, suggesting that the conception of a primordial void predates the separation of the Greek and Germanic peoples. Others argue for independent development from common human psychology. Hindu cosmology presents yet another variation. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest Hindu scriptures, contains a famous creation hymn, Nasadiya Sukta, that begins, "Then even nothingness was not, nor existence. There was no air then, nor the heavens beyond it. What covered it? Where was it? In whose keeping?" This hymn is remarkable for its agnosticism. It asks questions about origins without claiming to answer them. The closest it comes to naming the primordial state is a darkness wrapped in darkness, which sounds similar to both the Greek chaos and the Egyptian nun. Later Hindu texts develop elaborate cosmologies involving cycles of creation and destruction, the cosmic egg, Hiranyagarbha, and the god Brahma as creator. The concept of Maya, the illusory nature of the phenomenal world, suggests that the chaos-cosmos distinction is itself an illusion, that ultimate reality is unchanging Brahman underlying all appearances. Chinese cosmology offers still another perspective. The concept of Hundan, often translated as chaos, refers to a primordial state of undifferentiated wholeness. In some accounts, the giant Pangu emerged from the cosmic egg of Hundan and separated heaven from earth by growing larger between them. When Panga died, his body became the features of the world, his eyes the sun and moon, his breath the wind, his voice thunder. The Chinese Hundan differs from Greek chaos in important ways. It is often depicted as a lump or blob rather than a void, closer to Ovid's conception than Hesiod's. In Chinese philosophy, particularly Taoism, sometimes valorizes chaos as a state of natural harmony before human interference imposed artificial distinctions. The Taoist sage seeks to return to something like Handan, recovering the spontaneous unity that precedes differentiation. What can we conclude from these cross-cultural comparisons? At minimum, they show that the question of cosmic origins was a universal concern in the ancient world. Every culture asked where the world came from and developed mythological accounts to answer that question. Many of these accounts share common features: a primordial state of formlessness or darkness, the emergence of gods or cosmic forces from this state, the gradual differentiation of the cosmos into its current structure. Whether these similarities reflect cultural borrowing, independent development from common human psychology, or some combination of both remains unclear. The Greeks were certainly aware of Egyptian and Near Eastern cultures. Trade, colonization, and war brought them into contact from an early date. Some scholars argue that specific elements of Greek mythology, perhaps including the chaos concept, were borrowed from these neighbors. Others maintain that the Greeks developed their own distinctive cosmology, parallel to but not derived from their neighbors. What is clear is that chaos, however it originated, took on a distinctive meaning in Greek thought. The void or chasm of Hesiod, the philosophical development by the pre-Socratics and Plato, the literary transformation by Ovid, all of these made chaos a specifically Greek concept, whatever its ultimate origins. And this Greek concept, transmitted through Roman culture and Christian theology, would shape Western thought about cosmic origins for millennia to come. The comparative study of creation myths reveals both the universality and the particularity of human attempts to understand origins. Every culture asks the same fundamental questions: what existed before the world began? How did order emerge from formlessness? Why is there something rather than nothing? But each culture answers these questions in its own way, shaped by its own experiences, beliefs, and cultural context. Chaos is the Greek answer, or rather, one Greek answer, since the tradition contains multiple variations. It is an answer that emphasizes void and emptiness, the gap that makes things possible. It is an answer that sees creation as emergence rather than conquest, generation rather than fabrication. And it is an answer that has profoundly shaped how Western civilization thinks about origins, order, and the nature of reality. We have traced chaos from its emergence in Hesiod's theogony through its philosophical development, its alternative forms in Orphic tradition, its Roman transformation in Ovid, and its parallels in neighboring cultures. But we have not yet fully explored what may be the most important question. What is the relationship between chaos and the ordered cosmos that emerged from it? This is not merely an academic question. It touches on fundamental issues in philosophy and theology. Is the universe fundamentally ordered or disordered? Is form an accident or an essence? Is the cosmos stable or precarious, a permanent achievement or a temporary respite from primordial chaos? The Greek word cosmos itself is revealing. It means order or arrangement, and by extension, the world. When the Greeks called the universe a cosmos, they were making a statement. The universe is not chaotic, it is ordered. The stars move in regular patterns. The seasons follow one another in predictable sequence. The elements have their proper places and tendencies. Whatever chaos existed at the beginning, the cosmos that emerged from it displays order, harmony, structure. Yet the Greeks were also aware that this order was not permanent or guaranteed. The theogony tells of cosmic conflicts: Cronus overthrowing Uranus, Zeus overthrowing Cronus, that threatened to dissolve the structure of existence. The Titans, imprisoned in Tartarus, might escape. New monsters might arise to challenge Zeus's rule. The order of the cosmos was an achievement, something won and maintained, not a given. This tension between order and chaos runs throughout Greek thought. The philosopher Heraclitus observed that the cosmos is in constant flux, that everything flows, that war is the father of all things. For Heraclitus, the appearance of stable objects is an illusion. Beneath the surface, everything is changing, struggling, becoming its opposite. The logos that governs these changes provides a kind of order, but it is a dynamic, processual order, not a static, permanent one. Plato, by contrast, sought stable foundations for knowledge and value. His theory of forms posits eternal, unchanging patterns that the physical world imitates imperfectly. The world of forms is perfectly ordered. The physical world, touched by matter and change, is less so. Plato's demiurge imposes as much order as matter will permit, but matter resists complete ordering. A residue of chaos remains in the physical world, not the primordial chaos of myth, but a principle of disorder, imperfection, and change. The Stoics developed a cyclic cosmology in which the ordered cosmos periodically dissolves back into fire, which they identified with the divine, and is then reformed. In this view, cosmic order is not permanent but rhythmic, a pattern that repeats eternally. The current cosmos had a beginning and will have an end, followed by a new beginning. Chaos is thus not just the past origin, but the future destination, and then the origin again. These philosophical perspectives echo mythological themes. Hesiod's account of successive divine generations can be read as a story of increasing order, from the impersonal void of chaos, to the elemental darkness and night of Erebus and Nyx, to the more personal and active gods of subsequent generations, and finally to the rational rule of Zeus. Each generation is more ordered, more structured, more like the cosmos we inhabit. The primordial chaos is progressively overcome as the divine family evolves. Yet the mythological tradition also suggests that chaos is never fully vanquished. Night still falls every evening, a daily return of primordial darkness. Death still claims every mortal, returning them to the formlessness from which they emerged. The forces that Nyx bore, misery, strife, deception, still operate in human affairs. The order of Zeus's rule is real but incomplete. The children of chaos continue to shape our lives. This ambivalent relationship between cosmos and chaos finds expression in Greek religion and ritual. The Greeks worshipped at the boundary between order and disorder, marking thresholds and transitions. They recognized liminal spaces, crossroads, doorways, the times of dawn and dusk, as places where the normal rules were suspended, where chaos might break through. Their rituals often involved temporary inversions of social order, as in festivals like the ancestor, when the dead were believed to walk among the living. The mystery cults, including the Orphic mysteries, promised their initiates a way through chaos to a higher order. By undergoing ritual death and rebirth, by acquiring secret knowledge of the cosmos's true structure, the initiate could navigate the perilous regions between life and death, between the visible world and its invisible foundations. These cults recognized that chaos was not merely the distant origin, but an ever-present dimension of reality, one that must be acknowledged and traversed. The concept of fate in Greek thought is particularly relevant here. The Moirai, the Fates, are children of Nyx, grandchildren of chaos. They spin the thread of each mortal life, measure out its length, and cut it at death. Even the gods are subject to their decrees. Zeus himself cannot change what the fates have ordained. This fatalism runs deep in Greek thought, appearing in tragedy after tragedy as heroes struggle against destinies they cannot change. The fates represent a kind of order, a cosmic law that governs mortal existence. But it is an order that emerges from chaos, from the primordial night. The structure of our lives, the pattern of our destinies, is woven by beings older than the Olympian gods, beings who emerged from the void itself. This suggests that order and chaos are not simply opposites. Rather, order is a form that chaos takes, a pattern that emerges from formlessness. Greek tragedy explores this theme with unsettling power. Heroes like Oedipus and Agamemnon find that their attempts to impose order on their lives only lead them deeper into catastrophe. The more they try to control their destinies, the more completely they fulfill the fates that were always waiting for them. Order collapses into chaos. The king becomes the criminal. The savior becomes the destroyer. These tragedies suggest that human order is always fragile, always threatened by forces we cannot control or fully understand. And yet the Greeks did not despair. They built cities, wrote laws, pursued philosophy, created art. They sought to understand the cosmos, to find the patterns beneath the flux, to achieve some measure of control over their lives. Their response to the threat of chaos was not passive acceptance, but active engagement, an attempt to extend the domain of order, to push back the darkness, to make meaning in a universe that did not guarantee meaning. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of the Greek meditation on chaos and cosmos. The universe we inhabit is not self-evidently ordered. It is a cosmos because it has been made one. Whether by the gods or by human effort, order must be achieved and maintained. The void is always there, underlying the structures we build, waiting to receive them back. But this does not make the structures meaningless. On the contrary, it makes them precious. Against the background of primordial chaos, the ordered cosmos shines all the brighter. Before we conclude our journey, we must pause to consider how chaos has been represented in art and symbolism throughout the ages. For while mythology and philosophy give us concepts and narratives, it is art that makes these abstractions visible, that gives form to the formless. The challenge of depicting chaos is obvious. How do you represent something that, by definition, lacks form? The primordial void cannot be painted or sculpted in any straightforward way. Artists who have attempted to portray chaos have resorted to various strategies, each revealing something about how their cultures understood this mysterious concept. Ancient Greek artists, for the most part, did not attempt to depict chaos directly. The primordial void was too abstract, too fundamental, too far removed from the human-scale narratives that dominated Greek visual art. Instead, they depicted chaos's descendants, Nyx riding her chariot across the sky, Hypnos and Thanatos carrying the body of a fallen hero, Eros drawing back his bow. Through these personified figures, the invisible void became visible in its effects. The famous vase in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that we mentioned earlier shows Nyx and Hemera on either side of Helios, the sun god. This image captures the daily rhythm that connects us to chaos, the alternation of night and day, darkness and light, that has continued since the first moment of creation. Nyx, with her dark robes and starry veil, embodies the primordial darkness from which she emerged. When we look at her image, we are looking at a figure one generation removed from chaos itself. The Orphic tradition produced some of the most striking visual representations of cosmic origins. The Orphic egg, the cosmic egg from which fans emerged, became a powerful symbol in ancient art and continued to influence visual culture for millennia. Surviving reliefs show Fans, the firstborn god, bursting from the egg, his golden wings spread wide, surrounded by the coils of a serpent representing time or necessity. The egg itself represents the potential that preceded actuality, the compressed unity that would unfold into the diversity of the cosmos. The serpent that wraps around the Orphic egg is particularly significant. Snakes shed their skins and appear to be reborn, making them symbols of immortality and cyclical renewal. In Orphic iconography, the serpent represents Chronos, time, or Ananke, necessity, the forces that surrounded and incubated the cosmic egg. This image of a serpent encircling the world egg appears in various forms across many cultures, from the Norse Midgard serpent to the Gnostic Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. Medieval and Renaissance artists, working within a Christian framework, had a complex relationship with classical conceptions of chaos. On one hand, the classical myths were pagan and therefore suspect. On the other hand, they provided a rich vocabulary of images and concepts that could be adapted to Christian purposes. The idea of creation from chaos, in particular, resonated with certain interpretations of Genesis. Medieval illuminated manuscripts sometimes depicted the creation as a transformation of chaos into cosmos, with God's hand reaching into a swirling mass to separate light from darkness, land from sea. The chaos in these images typically follows Ovid's conception, a confused jumble of elements rather than Hesiod's empty void. This made it easier to visualize. A mass can be depicted, while a void cannot. The Dutch painter Hendrik Goltzius, working in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, created influential images of primeval chaos for his illustrated edition of Ovid's Metamorphoses. His engravings show a scene of violence and confusion, with semi-formed figures struggling against one another in a swirling darkness. This dramatic interpretation emphasizes the disorder of chaos, the warring seeds of unassembled things that Ovid described. The Romantic period saw a renewed interest in chaos as a symbol of creative potential. For the Romantics, the ordered world of Enlightenment rationality seemed sterile and constraining. They sought the wild, the untamed, the sublime, and they found it in images of primordial chaos. Painters like John Martin created vast canvases depicting cosmic cataclysms, moments when the ordered world seems about to dissolve back into formless darkness. The poet and painter William Blake drew on classical and biblical imagery to create his own mythological system, in which primordial chaos plays an important role. Blake's figure of Urizen represents oppressive reason, the tyrannical ordering principle that constrains human creativity. Against Urizen stands the figure of Los, the creative imagination, who works to redeem the fallen world. In Blake's vision, too much order is as dangerous as too little. True creativity emerges from a dynamic tension between form and formlessness. The 20th century saw new approaches to representing chaos in art. Abstract painters, freed from the requirement to depict recognizable objects, could approach something like pure formlessness. Jackson Pollock's drip paintings, with their tangled skeins of paint, evoke a state before structure. Not quite chaos, since patterns emerge, but something closer to chaos than traditional representational art could achieve. The Surrealists, inspired by psychoanalytic ideas about the unconscious, sought to access states of mind beneath rational control. Their techniques of automatic writing and drawing, of cultivating dreams and random associations, were attempts to tap into something like the primordial creativity that precedes conscious ordering. Salvador Dali's melting clocks and impossible landscapes suggest a world where the normal rules have been suspended, where chaos has begun to reassert itself against the structures of everyday reality. In music, the concept of chaos has inspired composers to explore the boundaries between order and disorder. John Cage's famous piece 4 feet 33 inches, in which the performer sits in silence for the specified duration, could be heard as an attempt to present something like musical chaos, not random sounds, but the absence of intentional sound, a void that makes audible the environmental sounds we normally ignore. Contemporary visual artists continue to engage with chaos as a theme and concept. Digital artists use algorithms and generative processes to create works that emerge from simple rules but exhibit complex, unpredictable behavior. Visual representations of mathematical chaos theory. These images of fractal patterns and strange attractors give visible form to the order within disorder that chaos theory reveals. The symbolism of chaos extends beyond visual art into broader cultural meanings. Politically, chaos is often invoked as the alternative to order, the anarchic state that will result if authority is challenged or removed. This framing, which goes back at least to Hobbes, positions chaos as something to be feared and avoided, a condition of war against all that only strong governance can prevent. But there is also a revolutionary tradition that embraces chaos as the necessary precondition for a new order. Destroy what destroys you, the anarchist slogan proclaims, accepting that the existing order must be dissolved before a better one can emerge. This tradition draws on the mythological pattern we have traced. Cosmos emerges from chaos, which means that a new cosmos might require a return to chaos, a dismantling of existing structures to make room for new ones. In psychology, chaos has become a powerful metaphor for certain mental states. Psychosis is sometimes described as a dissolution of the ordered ego, a return to something like primordial confusion. Depression can feel like a void, an emptiness where meaning used to be. Anxiety often involves a sense that the normal structures of life are threatening to collapse, that chaos is pressing in at the edges of the ordered world. But psychological chaos can also be creative. The breakdown of existing patterns, however painful, can make room for new ones. The therapeutic process often involves a controlled encounter with inner chaos, a descent into difficult emotions and memories, a willingness to let old structures dissolve so that healthier ones can emerge. This psychological journey echoes the mythological pattern through the darkness of chaos toward a new dawn. The symbolism of chaos thus extends across domains: cosmological, artistic, political, psychological. In each domain, chaos represents the absence or dissolution of structure, the state that precedes or follows ordered existence. And in each domain, the relationship between chaos and order is complex. Order emerges from chaos, but order can also rigidify into oppression. Chaos threatens to dissolve meaning, but chaos also contains the potential for new meaning to emerge. This ambivalence is perhaps the deepest truth that the symbol of chaos conveys. Neither chaos nor order is simply good or bad. Each needs the other. Each generates the other. The cosmos that emerged from chaos will one day return to it, and from that return, new cosmoses may emerge. The cycle continues eternally, the ancient dance of form and formlessness, light and darkness, being and void. As we contemplate these artistic and symbolic representations, we are participating in a tradition as old as human creativity itself. The first cave painters, working by flickering firelight in the darkness of their underground chambers, were already exploring the boundary between light and darkness, order and chaos, form and formlessness. The artists who came after them, in every culture and every age, have continued this exploration, giving visible form to the invisible mystery that lies at the heart of existence. Chaos cannot be fully represented, that is part of its nature. But the attempt to represent it, the struggle to give form to formlessness, is itself meaningful. It connects us to the deepest questions about the nature of reality and our place within it. When we look at an image of fans emerging from the cosmic egg, or a painting of swirling primordial matter, or an abstract composition that evokes something beneath structure, we are contemplating the same mystery that Hesiod named 3,000 years ago. And perhaps this is the ultimate gift of art, not to answer our questions about chaos and cosmos, but to keep those questions alive, to give them form so that we can contemplate them, to make visible the invisible so that we can continue to wonder. We have traveled through ancient Greece, encountering chaos in mythology, philosophy, and religion. But the journey does not end in antiquity. The concept of chaos, both the Greek original and its later transformations, continues to resonate in modern thought, from cutting-edge physics to popular culture. Begin with cosmology. Modern physics tells us that our universe began approximately 13.8 billion years ago in an event called the Big Bang. Before the Big Bang, if before even has meaning in this context, there was no space, no time, no matter as we know it. The universe expanded from a singularity, a point of infinite density and zero volume, into the vast cosmos we observe today. This scientific account bears remarkable similarities to the ancient mythological one. The Big Bang is, in a sense, the emergence of cosmos from chaos, the transition from a state where our usual categories do not apply to the structured universe of stars and galaxies and planets. The singularity is like chaos, something so different from our ordinary experience that we struggle to describe it, a boundary where our concepts break down. The physicist Lawrence Krauss has argued that the universe can arise from nothing, that quantum mechanics allows for the spontaneous emergence of matter and energy from a vacuum state. This quantum vacuum is not truly empty. It seethes with virtual particles popping in and out of existence on timescales too brief to observe directly. The vacuum is full of potential, full of possibilities waiting to become actual. This quantum foam resembles the ancient conception of chaos as pregnant void. Chaos was not empty in the sense of being purely absent. It was empty in the sense of containing all possibilities without any of them yet being actualized. The quantum vacuum is similar. It is a kind of cosmic potential, the ground from which actual particles and fields emerge. The parallel is not just metaphorical. Some physicists have seriously suggested that the intuitions of ancient cosmology anticipate certain features of modern physics. Both recognize that our universe is not self-explanatory, that it requires some ground or source from which it emerges. Both recognize that this ground is radically different from the universe it produces, so different that our normal concepts do not quite apply. Both confront the mystery of something coming from nothing, or from something so different from our experience that it might as well be nothing. The theory of cosmic inflation, developed in the early 1980s by Alan Guth and others, proposes that the very early universe underwent a period of exponential expansion, doubling in size many times over in a tiny fraction of a second. This inflation would have smoothed out any irregularities, producing the remarkably uniform universe we observe today. But before inflation, the universe may have been in a chaotic state, with wildly fluctuating energies and geometries. Inflation transformed this chaos into cosmos, producing the orderly structures we see around us. Chaos theory, as we mentioned earlier, gives another modern resonance to the ancient concept. Here, chaos refers not to primordial void but to deterministic systems with unpredictable behavior. The weather is chaotic in this sense. It follows the laws of physics exactly, yet we cannot predict it more than a few days in advance because small errors in our initial measurements get amplified over time. Edward Lorenz, who pioneered chaos theory in the 1960s, discovered this phenomenon while running computer simulations of atmospheric convection. He found that tiny differences in starting conditions, differences as small as rounding errors, led to completely different outcomes. This sensitivity to initial conditions is the hallmark of chaotic systems, captured in the famous image of a butterfly's wing flap causing a tornado halfway around the world. But chaos theory reveals something deeper than mere unpredictability. It shows that complex, structured patterns can emerge from simple rules operating chaotically. The branching patterns of rivers and trees, the spiral structures of galaxies and hurricanes, the fractal coastlines and mountain ranges. All these exhibit order arising from chaos, structure emerging from apparent randomness. This is reminiscent of the mythological vision, cosmos emerging from chaos, form arising from formlessness. The mathematical objects known as strange attractors provide a particularly vivid illustration. In a chaotic system, the state of the system traces out a path in an abstract mathematical space. For a simple system, this path might settle down to a point, an equilibrium, or a simple loop, a periodic cycle. But for a chaotic system, the path traces out a strange attractor, a complex, fractal shape that the system approaches but never quite reaches. The Lorentz attractor, for instance, looks like a butterfly's wings, with the system spiraling around one wing before suddenly jumping to the other. Strange attractors are ordered in their structure but chaotic in their dynamics. The system never repeats exactly. Each orbit around the attractor is slightly different, yet all the orbits share the same overall shape. This is a kind of order within disorder that the ancients might have recognized, not the stable, permanent order of Parmenidean being, but the dynamic, processual order of Heraclitean becoming. The concept of entropy, central to thermodynamics, offers yet another connection to ancient themes. Entropy measures disorder. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy tends to increase over time in isolated systems. This means that the universe is moving from order to disorder, from structured arrangements to homogeneous confusion. If we run the clock backward, the early universe was much more ordered than it is today. This might seem to contradict the mythological vision, in which the universe moves from chaos to order. But physicists speak of different kinds of order. The early universe was ordered in the sense of being very smooth and uniform, all matter and energy packed together at nearly the same temperature. But this uniformity contained enormous potential for structure. As the universe expanded and cooled, gravity and other forces sculpted the uniform matter into stars and galaxies, structures that are, in another sense, more ordered than the primordial soup. The relationship between order and disorder is more complex than a simple opposition. Recent work in cosmology has raised even more profound questions about the nature of cosmic origins. The theory of eternal inflation, proposed by André Linde and others, suggests that our Big Bang may have been just one of many, part of an infinite multiverse of pocket universes eternally budding off from an inflating background. If this theory is correct, then there is no ultimate origin. The inflationary process has been going on forever, or at least for an eternity in the past. The multiverse hypothesis challenges our usual notions of cosmic beginnings. If there are infinitely many universes, each with its own Big Bang, then our cosmos is not unique. It is one bubble among many, one ordered realm within an infinite sea of quantum fluctuations. The primordial chaos, in this view, is not something that preceded the cosmos, but something that surrounds it, an eternal background from which cosmoses are forever emerging. String theory, another approach to fundamental physics, suggests that space itself may have additional dimensions beyond the three we experience. In some versions of string theory, our universe is a brane floating in a higher dimensional space, and the Big Bang may have been triggered by a collision with another brane. This ekpyrotic scenario, named after the Greek word for conflagration, imagines cosmic origins as a kind of collision or transformation rather than an emergence from nothing. These speculative theories remain controversial, and most physicists would caution against drawing too direct parallels with ancient mythology. Modern physics is a mathematical enterprise, rigorously constrained by observation and experiment, very different from the poetic imagination of Hesiod or the Orphics. Yet the questions being asked are remarkably similar. What existed before the beginning? How did structure emerge from formlessness? Why is there something rather than nothing? Moving from physics to culture, the figure of chaos has appeared in countless works of literature, art, and entertainment. The Roman poet Ovid's vision of primordial confusion influenced medieval and Renaissance depictions of creation. John Milton's Paradise Lost draws on chaos as a realm through which Satan travels to reach Earth, a wild abyss, the womb of nature, and perhaps her grave. The Romantic poets found in chaos a symbol of creative potential, the formless source from which new forms emerge. In contemporary popular culture, chaos often appears as a villain or antagonist, a force that threatens the established order. Video games feature chaos as an enemy to be defeated, a dark power that must be overcome for the world to be saved. The game Hades, set in the Greek underworld, depicts chaos as a mysterious primordial entity who offers boons to the protagonist, acknowledging both the terror and the generative power that the ancients associated with this figure. Comic books and fantasy novels frequently draw on Greek mythology, reimagining the primordial gods for modern audiences. Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, for instance, features personifications of abstract concepts, dream, death, desire, that echo the Greek conception of divine forces embodying aspects of reality. The figure of chaos appears in various forms across modern fantasy literature, sometimes as a literal deity, sometimes as a metaphysical principle. The Discordian religion, founded in the late 1950s as a mixture of satire and sincere spirituality, worships Eros, the Greek goddess of discord and strife, a daughter of Nyx, and thus a grandchild of chaos. Discordians celebrate disorder as a creative force, opposing what they see as the oppressive structures of conventional religion and society. Their sacred text, the Principia Discordia, proclaims, "All things happen in fives, or are divisible by, or are multiples of five, or are somehow directly or indirectly appropriate to five," a mock principle that parodies the human desire to find order in everything. This countercultural embrace of chaos reflects a broader 20th century trend. The Dada and Surrealist movements in art deliberately cultivated randomness and disorder, using chance operations to produce works that defied rational interpretation. Abstract expressionist painters like Jackson Pollock dripped and splattered paint on canvas, allowing gravity and chance to determine the final form. These artistic movements can be seen as attempts to access something like primordial chaos, the creative potential that exists before rational ordering imposes its structures. The psychology of Carl Jung developed the concept of the shadow, the unconscious aspects of the self that the ego does not acknowledge. Jung often associated the shadow with chaos, disorder, and primordial darkness. The shadow contains both dangerous and creative potential. It is the source of our darkest impulses, but also of our deepest creativity. In Jungian therapy, the goal is not to defeat the shadow, but to integrate it, to acknowledge and accept those aspects of ourselves that we would prefer to deny. This psychological vision echoes the ancient recognition that chaos cannot be eliminated, only transformed. The ego emerges from the unconscious and maintains itself against the ever-present possibility of dissolution. Sanity, in this view, is an achievement, not a given, a kind of psychic cosmos maintained against the chaos of the unconscious. Dreams, those nightly journeys into the realm of hypnos and the oniroy, are moments when the ordered ego gives way to something older and stranger. Even our language retains the marks of this ancient concept. We speak of chaotic situations, of imposing order on confusion, of cosmos and cosmetics, which originally meant the art of ordering or arranging. The opposition between chaos and order structures how we think about politics, society, personal life. We inherit, whether we know it or not, the conceptual framework that the ancient Greeks developed 3 millennia ago. The persistence of chaos in our culture suggests that the Greeks touched on something genuinely universal. The mystery of origins, the tension between order and disorder, the recognition that structure emerges from formlessness. These are not parochial concerns of ancient Mediterranean civilization. They are fundamental human questions, arising whenever we reflect on the nature of existence. And so chaos travels from Hesiod's theogony to modern physics, from Orphic mysteries to popular entertainment, from ancient philosophy to contemporary psychology. At each stage, it transforms, adapting to new conceptual frameworks while retaining its essential character as the primal ground, the mysterious origin, the void from which all things emerge. We have spoken of chaos as children and grandchildren, but the full scope of this primordial deity's influence extends far beyond what we have described. To truly understand chaos's place in the Greek cosmos, we must trace its lineage more completely, exploring the beings who descended from that original void and the roles they played in shaping mortal existence. Begin with Nyx's children, those offspring she bore without a consort, bringing them forth from herself alone. We have mentioned them briefly, but each deserves more attention, for each represents a fundamental aspect of human experience that traces back, ultimately, to chaos. Thanatos, death, is perhaps the most significant of Nyx's children. In Greek thought, Thanatos represented the peaceful death that comes at the end of a natural life, distinct from the violent deaths brought by the Charis or the punishments inflicted by the gods. Thanatos was depicted as a gentle figure, often winged, carrying an inverted torch, symbolizing the extinguishing of life's flame, and sometimes accompanied by his twin brother Hypnos. The relationship between death and sleep fascinated the Greeks. Both bring a cessation of consciousness, a surrender of the waking self. Both take us into darkness, into a state more like chaos than like the ordered world of day. The Greeks sometimes called sleep the brother of death, recognizing in nightly unconsciousness a preview of the final unconsciousness awaiting us all. But there is an important difference. Sleep is temporary. We wake from it, returning to the world of light and activity. Death is permanent, or so the mainstream Greek tradition held. The underworld, where the dead dwell, is a place of shadows and diminished existence, a pale reflection of mortal life. Only in the mystery religions, with their promises of rebirth and transformation, did the Greeks entertain more hopeful views of what lies beyond death's door. Hypnos, sleep, was worshipped in his own right, and his dwelling was described in elaborate detail by later poets. He lived in a cave in the far west, or in some accounts, in the underworld near his mother Nyx, surrounded by poppies and other soporific plants. Rivers of forgetfulness flowed near his home, and the only sounds were the gentle murmuring of these streams. Hypnos himself reclined on a soft couch, surrounded by his 1,000 sons, the Oneiroi, the dreams. The Oneiroi, dreams, are another set of chaos's descendants. In some accounts, they are the children of Hypnos, in others, the children of Nyx herself. They lived in the underworld near the land of the dead, emerging each night through one of two gates, the gate of horn, through which true dreams pass, and the gate of ivory, through which false dreams emerge. This image, from Homer's Odyssey, suggests that the Greeks recognized both the prophetic potential and the deceptive nature of dreams. The Greeks took dreams seriously as potential messages from the divine. A true dream might reveal the future, warn of danger, or provide guidance in difficult decisions. But a false dream might mislead, confuse, or tempt the dreamer into error. The art of dream interpretation was an important skill, practiced by professional diviners who could distinguish true dreams from false ones. Dreams connect us to chaos in a profound way. When we dream, the ordered structures of waking consciousness dissolve. Identity becomes fluid. Time loses its meaning. Impossible things happen without causing surprise. The dream world is chaotic in the sense that Hesiod intended. It is a gap, a void, a space between the solid realities of waking life. And yet from this chaos, meaning can emerge. Dreams can reveal truths that waking reason cannot grasp. The Moirai, the Fates, are among the most important of Nyx's descendants. We have mentioned them before, but their significance cannot be overstated. Clotho, the spinner, spins the thread of each mortal life at birth. Lachesis, the allottor, measures out its length. Atropos, the unbending, cuts it at death. These three sisters determine the span of every human existence and the major events that will occur within it. The Greeks believed that even the gods were subject to the fates, that there were decrees of destiny that not even Zeus could overturn. This belief appears throughout Greek literature, most famously in the tragedies, where heroes struggle against fates that were determined before they were born. Oedipus tries to escape the oracle that said he would kill his father and marry his mother, but every action he takes to avoid this fate only brings it closer. The fates are implacable, unpersuadable, bound by some higher necessity that transcends even divine will. What is this necessity? The Greeks called it Ananke, and in some cosmologies, particularly the Orphic tradition, Ananke was herself a primordial deity, perhaps even older than chaos. Ananke and her daughters the Moirai represent the recognition that existence operates according to laws, patterns, structures that cannot be violated. Even the gods must work within these constraints. The universe is not arbitrary. It follows rules, even if those rules are often hidden from mortal understanding. Nemesis, divine retribution, is another daughter of Nyx. She personifies the principle that excessive pride or good fortune invites disaster. The Greeks believed that the cosmos tends toward balance, that those who rise too high will be brought low, that those who commit crimes will eventually face punishment. Nemesis ensures this balance, pursuing the arrogant and the guilty with implacable determination. The concept of Nemesis connects to the broader Greek understanding of cosmic justice. The universe, despite its origin in chaos, is not unjust. There are patterns, consequences, moral laws built into the fabric of reality. Those who violate these laws, who commit hubris, who harm others, who upset the natural order, will face Nemesis. This is not always obvious in the short term. The wicked sometimes prosper while the good suffer. But in the long run, the Greeks believed balance would be restored. Eros, strife, is perhaps the most famous of Nyx's children in modern culture, thanks to the myth of the Apple of Discord. It was Eros who threw the golden apple inscribed to the fairest among the goddesses, starting the chain of events that led to the Trojan War. But Eros represents more than this single myth. She is strife itself, the principle of conflict that pervades human existence. Hesiod, in his Works and Days, actually distinguishes two types of Eros. One is harmful, inciting war and violence. But the other is beneficial, the spirit of competition that drives people to work hard, to excel, to improve themselves. This good Eros is what we might call ambition or emulation. It shows that even strife, that child of night and grandchild of chaos, can serve positive purposes. Apate, deceit, and Sudia, lies, are daughters of Nyx who represent the darker possibilities of language. Humans, unlike other animals, can use words to misrepresent reality, to deceive, manipulate, and mislead. These children of night remind us that communication is not inherently truthful. The same language that allows us to share knowledge and coordinate action also allows us to lie, to betray, to construct elaborate deceptions. Garrus, old age, is another of Nyx's children. He represents the inevitable decay that comes with time, the gradual weakening of body and mind that precedes death. The Greeks had a complex relationship with old age. They respected the wisdom that comes with experience, and elders held honored positions in most Greek communities. But they also feared the infirmities of age the loss of strength and beauty and mental acuity. Gaia was not exactly an enemy. Old age is preferable to early death, but neither was he a friend. Oasis, misery, and Momus, blame, complete the darker side of Nyx's brood. These figures represent the suffering and criticism that pervade human life. We are never free from misery. Even in the happiest moments, we know that suffering waits in the future. And we are never free from blame. Others judge us constantly, and we judge ourselves. These children of night do not represent occasional misfortunes, but permanent features of the human condition. Yet Nyx also bore philides, affection or friendship. This daughter represents the tenderness that exists between lovers, friends, and family members. Philides is a counterweight to Eros. If strife divides us, affection binds us together. Even amid all the darkness that Nyx brought forth, there is this gentle light. The recognition that love and friendship are as fundamental to human existence as death and strife. The Hesperides, nymphs of the evening, are also counted among Nyx's daughters in some accounts. They guard a garden at the western edge of the world where golden apples grow, apples that grant immortality to whoever eats them. The Hesperides represent the beauty of twilight, the magical time between day and night when the sky turns golden and purple. They remind us that darkness is not only terrifying but also beautiful, that the approach of night can be as lovely as the coming of dawn. Tracing these lineages, we see that chaos's influence extends into every corner of human experience. Through Nyx and her children, the primordial void touches our births and deaths, our dreams and waking hours, our loves and conflicts, our hopes and fears. The cosmos that emerged from chaos is not separate from it. Chaos's descendants still walk among us, shaping our lives in ways we may not recognize. This is perhaps the deepest teaching of the Greek cosmogony. The ordered world we inhabit is not cut off from its chaotic origins. The void is not merely in the past. It is present in every night, every death, every dream. We live in a cosmos, but the chaos from which that cosmos emerged remains active within it. To understand our existence, we must understand both poles, both the light of order and the darkness of the void. We have journeyed from the primordial void to the present day, tracing the concept of chaos through 3,000 years of thought and culture. What have we learned? What can we conclude about this mysterious figure at the beginning of all things? First, we have learned that chaos is older than the gods. In Hesiod's account, chaos comes to be before anything else, before Gaia, before the Titans, before Zeus. Even the most powerful deities of the Greek pantheon are chaos's descendants, inheritors of a cosmos that originated in that primordial void. This priority is not merely chronological, it is metaphysical. The gods exist within a cosmic structure that they did not create, a framework established by more fundamental powers. Second, we have learned that chaos is not quite a god and not quite a thing. Hesiod speaks of chaos in personal terms. It comes to be. It has offspring, yet chaos never acts in the myths, never speaks, never has adventures or emotions. It is personified enough to be part of a genealogy, but not personified enough to be a character. This ambiguity reflects the difficulty of describing what existed before the conditions for description were established. Third, we have learned that chaos gives rise to both darkness and light. From chaos come Erebus and Nyx, darkness and night. But from darkness and night come ether and hemera, light and day. The progression from void to darkness to light mirrors the emergence of form from formlessness, of actuality from potential. Chaos does not oppose the ordered cosmos. It makes it possible. Fourth, we have learned that the relationship between chaos and the other primordial beings, Gaia, Tartarus, Eros, remains genuinely mysterious. Hesiod's text is ambiguous about whether these are children of chaos or independent emanations from the same unknowable source. This ambiguity may be intentional, reflecting the limits of what can be said about ultimate origins. Fifth, we have learned that different traditions interpret chaos differently. For Hesiod, chaos is a gap or void. For the Orphics, it may be part of a cosmic egg or a swirling mixture. For Ovid, it is a confused mass of undifferentiated matter. These variations remind us that the mystery of origins admits multiple approaches, no one of which can claim exclusive truth. Sixth, we have learned that the concept of chaos influenced and was influenced by philosophy. The pre-Socratics sought naturalistic equivalents to mythological chaos. Plato developed the idea of formless matter receiving the impress of the forms. Aristotle analyzed the philosophical implications of Hesiod's text. Throughout, mythology and philosophy illuminated each other, different approaches to the same fundamental questions. Seventh, we have learned that similar concepts appear across cultures. The Egyptian Nun, the Babylonian Tiamat, the Hebrew Tohuwabohu, the Norse Ginnungagap, all represent attempts to name the nameless, to describe what existed before the world began. Whether through cultural borrowing or independent development, human beings across the ancient world grappled with the same cosmic mysteries. Eighth, we have learned that chaos persists in the ordered cosmos. Nyx still falls every night. Death still claims every mortal. The fates still spin and measure and cut the thread of life. Dreams still take us into realms where ordinary logic does not apply. The children of chaos continue to shape our experience, reminding us that the primordial void is never entirely overcome. Order is achieved and maintained against the ever-present background of formlessness. Ninth, we have learned that modern science echoes ancient intuitions. The Big Bang, the quantum vacuum, chaos theory, entropy, all these scientific concepts resonate with the mythological vision of cosmos emerging from chaos. The Greeks intuited through mythology what physicists would later explore through mathematics, that our ordered universe is a remarkable achievement, a structure that emerged from something radically different and might one day return to it. And 10th, we have learned that chaos remains relevant. From physics to popular culture, from psychology to philosophy, the concept of primordial formlessness continues to structure how we think about origins, order, and meaning. We are the heirs of Hesiod, whether we know it or not, using categories that were forged 3,000 years ago to understand our place in the cosmos. But perhaps the most important lesson is the simplest, that some mysteries cannot be solved, only contemplated. Chaos marks the limit of knowledge, the boundary beyond which our concepts lose their footing. We can name it, we can personify it, we can develop philosophical theories about it, we can find scientific parallels to it. But we cannot fully comprehend it, because it represents a state that preceded the conditions for comprehension. This is humbling. We like to think that science will eventually explain everything, that no mystery is in principle beyond our understanding. But the mystery of absolute origins may be different. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, may have no answer, or no answer that we can grasp. Chaos represents this ultimate mystery, the recognition that existence itself is inexplicable, a gift or a fact that simply is. The ancient Greeks understood this. They did not try to explain chaos. They simply acknowledged it as the beginning. They built their cosmology on this foundation of mystery, accepting that the ground of existence cannot itself be explained. This is not a failure of imagination, but a form of wisdom, the recognition that some truths are too deep for human understanding. And yet we continue to ask the questions. That, too, is human. We cannot help but wonder about origins, about the nature of reality, about what lies beneath and beyond the world of our experience. The figure of chaos invites this wonder. It stands at the beginning of all stories, a reminder that every explanation eventually reaches a point where explanation fails, a point where we can only contemplate and marvel. As we close our eyes tonight, as darkness falls and night spreads her veil across the sky, we participate in a rhythm as old as existence itself. We return, temporarily, to something like the primordial state, formless, quiet, dark. And when we wake tomorrow, when day chases night back to her western dwelling, we participate in the emergence of light from darkness, cosmos from chaos, that has been happening since the very first moment. The story of chaos is our story. We emerged from the void, and to the void we will return. In between, we have this brief moment of form, this flicker of consciousness in the vast darkness. What we do with it, what meaning we create, what love we share, what beauty we bring into being. This is our contribution to the cosmic drama that began when chaos first came to be. So let the ancient Greeks have the last word. Let Hesiod speak across the millennia. Verily at the first chaos came to be, but next wide-bosomed Gaia, the ever-sure foundations of all the deathless ones who hold the peaks of snowy Olympus, and dim Tartarus in the depth of the wide-pathed earth, and Eros, fairest among the deathless gods, who unnerves the limbs and overcomes the mind and wise counsels of all gods and all men within them. From chaos came forth Erebus and black night, but of night were born ether and day, whom she conceived and bore from union and love with Erebus. From void to darkness, from darkness to light, from formlessness to form. This is the pattern of creation, the rhythm of existence, the story that underlies all stories. This is chaos. This is the beginning. And in some sense, it is always the beginning, always now, always the moment when something emerges from nothing, when form arises from formlessness, when the cosmos begins again. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of humanity's oldest and most profound mysteries. The primordial void that the Greeks called chaos remains as mysterious today as it was 3,000 years ago, perhaps more so, as modern science reveals depths and complexities that Hesiod could never have imagined. But the fundamental questions remain unchanged. What existed before the world began? How did order emerge from formlessness? Why is there something rather than nothing? These questions are as old as human consciousness, and they will be asked as long as human beings look up at the stars and wonder. The ancient Greeks answered with mythology, with stories of divine beings emerging from the void and giving birth to the cosmos we inhabit. Their answer is not our answer. We have physics and mathematics and telescopes that can see back almost to the Big Bang itself. But their answer captures something that our scientific answers sometimes miss: the sense of wonder, the acknowledgement of mystery, the humility before the unknown. Chaos is that humility given a name. It is the recognition that we do not know, cannot know, what lies at the absolute foundation of existence. It is the acceptance that some questions are too deep for human understanding and the determination to ask them anyway. So the next time you find yourself awake in the darkness, unable to sleep, staring into the void of night, remember that you are contemplating the most ancient of mysteries. The darkness that surrounds you is a descendant of that primordial night, daughter of chaos, older than the mountains and the seas. And you yourself are part of the cosmic story that began in that unfathomable void, a brief pattern of form and consciousness emerging from the formless and returning to it. We are children of chaos, all of us. And there is something beautiful in that, something that connects us to the deepest roots of existence, to the very beginning of everything that is. If this exploration of ancient mythology and cosmic mystery resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. We have many more journeys to take together, through the realms of myth and folklore, through the depths of sleep and dream, through the stories that humanity has told since the beginning of time. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and join us for the next adventure. Because the oldest stories are still the most relevant, and the deepest mysteries are still waiting to be explored. Until next time, sleep well, and remember that the darkness is not empty. It is full of ancient powers, cosmic forces, the children and grandchildren of that primordial void that the Greeks called chaos. Let them watch over you as you sleep. Let them bring you dreams of other worlds, other times, other possibilities. And when you wake, when day returns to chase night away, know that you are participating in a rhythm as old as existence itself. You are part of the cosmic story. You emerged from chaos, and to chaos you will one day return. But in between, you have this beautiful, fleeting moment of form and light and consciousness. Make it count. Good night, and may the ancient powers guard your sleep.